right, good morning, buenos dias. Welcome to today's State Board of Education meeting. Today's meeting will be focusing on Student Success Act, and we have a number of members on the phone, so that's why we've been trying to get everybody coordinated. So it's going to be a little bit different because usually we're all here, but we've got quite a few that are on the phone. So I'd like to, those on the phone, if you could all please mute yourselves unless you are speaking. It'll probably cut back on a lot of the feedback. And after we hear our presentations today, I will check in with each one of you. And they're probably not going to hear half of what I'm saying, so they're just barely logging in. Okay, we'll have to let them know as we go. But what we'll do is we'll go and ask them if they have any feedback, so or any questions or comments. So we're going to have to kind of all work together there in this. So I'll ask the presenters to please indicate when they change the slides so that we can all kind of keep track of the presentation. But as a new tradition, we will start today with a video celebrating the student success in the Gresham Barlow School District. So if you could all take a look at the screen.
Other words I could use to describe the school is big. Well, I already used big and pretty. Amazing, delightful, and safe.
It's the same teacher, it's the same kids in the room, it's the same curriculum. The only thing that's different is the building. Has changed, I think, the students' perspective and the students' desire. They seem so much more intent on learning and so much more engaged and so much more interested in improving themselves. It absolutely gives them a sense that they matter.
I think one thing that really surprised me was how excited our kids were. On the first day of school, I really looked at faces, and what I saw was just appreciation and joyfulness and pride. The feeling that it gave them that this is my school and this is where I get to learn.
Last year, I kind of acted out a little bit. The light, I don't know, I'm being different this year.
Everybody feels better in the school.
I feel more happier, and then it makes me want to be better. It's better, because in the old school, it was really dark and crowded. People are more respectful in this school than the old one. Because they love this school so much.
And they're proud to talk about their building and their classrooms and their teachers.
It's night and day from the building we were in.
The classrooms are better because it has more technology, more windows, and more lights. We had like little mini lockers. I like the classrooms because they are larger and there's water fountains inside of them.
And we have a new Clever Touch board.
The interactive flat panels have really opened up what we can do with the kids to share information in real time.
They can stand up, they can touch our board, they can manipulate, they can add text.
The integrated sound system has been amazing. Now I don't have to worry about that student in the back of the room. We have this beautiful area outside of our classroom. I can send students out there to work in groups. They're not so closed in.
We can study out in the hallway because the space is more big. It helps me finish my work and do work with other people.
My favorite space in the building is the library because it looks really nice. It has a nice view-bound hood.
We have more windows in the library. We have more space.
There's a window that looks down to the cafeteria.
The space in the cafeteria is huge. You feel like you are eating in a courtyard. It's that much light.
And it's not dark anymore, like the old school.
I really love it. And I'm pretty sure they do too.
The gym is bigger than the last one because it's a high school-sized court. It has more security, and it makes me feel safe at school now.
And nobody can walk into school without a pass.
Everyone accesses the building through the front doors.
It's really important to have that double barrier as you enter a building and the call button. And so we as teachers don't have to wonder who's in the building.
I think the kids feel 100% safe.
Every day I come to work, it's just a phenomenal experience that I'm entering this modern 21st century building. It is a pure pleasure to teach here.
What we're feeling is really blessed to have such a wonderful learning environment for our students and our staff. It's just a real gift, and we very much appreciate it.
I am very happy in this school. I love it. I want to say thank you for this new school because it makes me want to learn more and come to class every day.
I think having the community say yes to the bond tells our students that they matter, they are important. We're going to invest in you, and we're going to invest in your future.
Thank you, voters. I love my new school.
I was so excited about going to school. I'm proud to go to this school.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
So thank you. Just anybody who's new, we do this as now a new tradition so that we can kind of always remind ourselves why we're here. And again, I would also echo thanks to the voters across Oregon, because not only Gresham Barlow, but Oregonians across the state in both urban and rural settings have passed bonds. And so thank you for that investment. Moving forward, we're going to go ahead and take roll call.
Roshan Sunder,
Here.
Lauren Wen, Gustavo Balderas,
Present.
Alyssa Nestler, can the people on the phone hear me?
Yes, here.
Yes.
Sorry, I was muted.
Great, no worries. Ryan Mann, Sherry Helt, Jennifer Skurlock,
Here.
Bridget Wheeler, here. Jerry Colonna,
Here.
George Russell,
Here.
Guadalupe Martinez Zapata,
Here.
Kimberly Howard,
Here.
Anthony Valise,
Here.
Hope Gill.
Thank you, Zoe. Up next, we have our director's report, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Board
members
Right.
report. Got a little dyslexia there. Board members report. So I want to first welcome and introduce our newest board member, Jennifer Skurlock, and thank you for. It's a pleasure. We actually ran into each other in the elevator in a rush to get here, and we didn't even know who we were. So. What we do customarily is we go around and give reports. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with you and introduce yourself to the rest of us here and those on the phone.
Sure. So hi, my name is Jennifer Skurlock. I'm a proud teacher at Churchill High School in Eugene, Oregon. I'm a mother of two, Donovan Skurlock and Michaela Skurlock, and I married the boy across the street that I grew up with, John Skurlock. I call him Bubba. But we've been married for 22 years, and it's a privilege to be here. The subjects that I teach AP English Language and Composition and English 11 at Churchill High School. I'm also an NEA board member, board of directors, so I travel to DC once a term to meet with our federal senators and representatives, and then I serve on the OEA board and then EEA, Eugene Education Association. I love education. I love working with people. I love advocating for students, and because I don't just believe in education, I believe in the power of education, and I believe that it opens up doors for students and families who would not have access to opportunities that I've been blessed to have through education, through awesome teachers, through awesome community members who have made a great impact in my life. One thing I was thinking about, Zoe had kind of shared with me that you get a chance to share some things. One thing that I was thinking about, and even watching this video today, is on last Friday we had our ALICE training. are in preparation for a potential shooter at school. And it kind of tugged at my heart as I was listening to these kids talk about feeling safe, and that's something that they're concerned about. And the day before we did our ALICE training, there was a shooting down in the LA area. And the needs of students have shifted even in the questions that we engaged in during our training. And it broke my heart that that's something that they have to carry along with just trying to navigate through the school system. And so my heart is gladdened when I hear young kids say, I feel safe, I'm happy to be here. Our school is clearly doing things that are ensuring our safety. But I just wanted to put out there just the reminder that a basic need of a child, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is food, water, shelter, and just above that is the need for safety. And so for children to learn and learn effectively, that must be brought to the forefront at all times. Do they feel safe? Are they fed? Are their basic needs met before we expect them to soar academically or soar in a social setting, as in sports or what have you? And so, I'm in this space. I'm honored to be here. This was my former superintendent, George Russell, always an advocate for me and family members, and then to have my present superintendent is, to be sandwiched here, and then to have EEA members and just people who have been advocating for me. It's a pleasure to give back and to do the same, and hopefully to continue to lift up the voices of my students and students across the state. So thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks. Welcome again. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn to our Superintendent of the Year, if you didn't know that, Dr. Gustavo Balderas. And
thank you. I also want to welcome Jennifer, one of our best teachers we have in 4J. Proud to call her a colleague, so thank you. And also I want to congratulate you, Anthony, for your for Woodburn success. I know we'll hear maybe a little bit later, but 5A state champs for both women and men. I think the first time ever for a state championship for Woodburn on the women's side, so congratulations on that. But I do want to talk a little bit about the student investment account. I really want to thank Colt and his staff for the guidance and leadership in terms of helping districts. The 196 of us tried, not 97 of us, guide our work, as this is something that's new. And really are appreciative of Scott Nine for the fabulous, really is a resource and asset for the department that we can utilize. Tonight we're holding our 38th community meeting with community or students in terms of having dialogue with community, and want to really express something that happened last night. We had a work session with our school board, and we had Spanish-speaking parents come to our board meeting and discuss in a guided manner what they felt was needed as well. And it was unique because the whole conversation was in Spanish. It was translated to the board in English. So that provided a great space for our families to be able to do that, and talked to the board chair on the way up this morning and stated that it was probably the best communication she's had with community in her 10 years. So, and also we had a really strong student dialogue directly after that. So I appreciate the opportunity, because I think this is really helping frame how we have really solid two-way communication with our community. So just wanted to share that out. So thank you.
Thank you. George?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to welcome Jennifer to our board. As she mentioned, I've known her and her family for many years, including her extended families. So I have to say I just keep getting prouder and prouder of her and the work that she's done. She's just been amazing, and it's been amazing to see the growth and the roles that she continues to play in our community and in our state and nationally. So appreciate that. Couple of quick things I want to mention. One is I had the opportunity to hear Colt again talk about Student Success Act and Student Investment Account when he did a presentation, keynote presentation to our Looking Glass annual board meeting down in Eugene. and talked about the Student Success Act, and I thought some opportunities for collaboration, communication between social service agencies and school districts as they looked at improving conditions for students, particularly in the areas of mental health and counseling, and how there might be some crossovers that could be looked at with respect to that. So I appreciated that. And then had the opportunity, I guess it wasn't yesterday, day before yesterday, to hear Dr. Balderas speak at a collective impact symposium that was sponsored by the United Way down in Lane County. And Dr. Balderas also talked about the Student Success Act in some ways, but also how it's important as they start looking at community engagement and working with community around developing their plan for the Student Success Act, to look more broadly than the traditional ways that districts have looked in the past and how to engage additional populations or groups that maybe have not been included in those discussions and conversations in the past. So I think we're starting to see with the Student Success Act a broadening of the folks that have the opportunity to be involved and share views and perspectives that may not have been the typical perspectives that we've received through our previous mechanisms of community engagement. And I see some real positives in that, and thank both Colt and Dr. Balderas for sharing those things in our communities.
So we'll go with Bridget.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I guess this morning, something that I'm still trying to understand, I'm new to the board, kind of that the hierarchy, the organizational chart, and coming from an extremely rural school district, I apologize if I say things that are maybe not underneath the Department of Education or not the state's responsibility, but I just feel compelled to talk about what I want to represent for the board, and that being the extremely rural school districts. My daughter graduated last year. There was 25 students in her graduating class. I'm from the Rural Point School District. And I think about the student investment funds and how important it is to communities, because some of these rural communities are really, speaking of Maslow's triangle, really engaged in that bottom level, that basic needs. And I think about our high school was just, half of our high school was condemned. And so all of our students are moved into half of the high school. We are having lunches bussed in from the elementary school. There's a lot of critical things going on, but we're very lucky to have a state that is so invested in our students, that's looking at how can we raise these students up, and how can we close that achievement gap, and how can we make huge strides and improvements, not just on their lives, but their families' lives, and to be able to watch the rollout of this and everybody's engagement in it is such an honor. So I guess that's what I wanted to share this morning.
Thank you. Jerry?
Thank you. Anthony, I'm going to, as board members, I'm going to take just a little bit longer than I normally do, because I'd like to report out some things from the OSBA conference that 5 of us were lucky enough to attend. And one of the first things I would say is that there was great support from the department in presentations in the breakout sessions. And I went to some of those that department members were leading, and was very pleased with how thorough and well done they were. I'd like to start on the morning, the first day's keynote speech. And the person who was presenting, Dr. Bryant Marks, he's a member of the clergy and also a professor at Morehouse University. He is a member of the National Network Training Institute of Race and Equity, and he did speak to us a great deal about diversity, guilt, and assumptions that we make that many times are wrong about other individuals based on appearance, etc. But one really disturbing thing that he said, and I don't even like kind of reporting this out, but because it was so egregious, I felt as though it needed to be shared with people that weren't here. He said, when we survey Americans about what things they think about regarding young black males in our country, what main words come out? And in order, number 1, dangerous, 2, criminal, 3, thug, 4, aggressive, 5, athlete, 6, angry, 7, lazy, 8, suspicious. Very difficult to hear that, but I know we know how prevalent that is. And it was a very good presentation. Again, I had not heard of him before, but I would recommend, if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, it would be worth considering. The second point that he made that I know we kind of know, but to hear it again is sad, but we need to face the music, so to speak. In comparison to white students, students of color have teachers that are 1, less experienced, 2, lower paid, 3, less likely to be certified, and 4, more likely to teach subjects that are outside of their area of expertise. Then I went to a presentation called The Portrait of a Graduate, a First Step in Transforming Your School System. And it again was done by Gresham Barlow, board members and central office staff. Extremely well done. The superintendent there is in her 3rd year, I believe, and she's from Texas. She is an African-American woman and doing a really, really outstanding job. I think Gresham Barlow is a school district for us to watch. And of course, this piece that started was really nice. Then I'd like to go to Saturday afternoon. They had all the different regions of the state represented in what they call roundtable discussions. So these would be the ESD folks and board members and superintendents from that region. And actually the one that we're supposed to go to is Marion County because of Salem. But because I live in Central Oregon, I decided to go to the Central Oregon one. Lots of good things said, but 3 things that they wanted me to carry back to this meeting, and they're things that you already know, but I said I would do so, and I guess it's worth hearing once again. As hard as we try with the student investment account to clarify things, here's 3 items that they had. 1, still quite a bit of confusion about the distribution of the 50%, 20%, and 30% distribution, both in terms of the amount of dollars, how decisions are made, where that money goes, and almost like we just can't say enough about that. And of course, Scott Nine did a really, really good job in his breakout session, but not everybody gets to hear that. The second item is a feeling of the fact that there's more people that are going to be hired in the Department of Education. That may equate to the district folks doing more work instead of less work because there's more people to help. So it's like if we add more people to the department, at least some out in the field feel that those people will be working here to make more work out there to kind of justify their existence. And I've kind of heard that before, but not quite as specific words as that. So what I mentioned to that is we have been moving from a compliance organization to a customer service organization, and that the people that are added are coming to assist, not to give more work or to slap hands. But that point was well made. And then I think the third one is still confusion that would be represented in a feeling of a lack of coordination. My Student Investment Act again, my response to that is, you know, this is fairly new. We're just starting out in it. There is clarification as time goes, but I think again, just a need for more and more information. And I know we're doing a tremendous amount of that, so I said I'd bring those ideas. There was a really nice presentation done by Scott Nine, and I know he's going to be speaking to us today. He had, I think, about an hour and 15 minutes. No, I guess it was shorter because it was at one of the breakfasts. About 45 minutes to present, but extremely well done, very, very well received. And I think, I know he's very, very busy, but the more of those presentations that he can do, the better. Towards the middle of the overall conference, we had the Superintendent of the Year presentation, and also the Teacher of the Year. And I've been going to these conferences. I don't think I've missed one in about 30 years, but I've never been to one where the presentations by the Teacher of the Year and the Superintendent of the Year were so moving, so gripping. And I know Gus had tears in his eyes, but so did many of us out in the audience. Guadalupe, Anthony, and I were sitting together and just said to ourselves, what extremely wonderful representations for public education in the state of Oregon. And Gus, I've heard you speak before, and I've heard other people up on that stage speak, but again, I want to congratulate you for such a well thought out, heartfelt presentation. It said a great deal to those school board members who were out there who may not typically hear those words. So congratulations to you. And I know you must have felt very bonded to the Teacher of the Year as well, because she confirmed your words and you confirmed hers. I wanted to then mention one other presentation. It was a keynote. I just like this one thought. And that he was speaking on the culture of hope. His name is Rick Miller. It was the last presentation of the conference. And talking about how students who are underrepresented or not given equal access to opportunity to an education need to be helped. But the sentence that I wanted to mention to you, he said, as long as we believe that there will be exceptions, there will be exceptions because we expect there to be exceptions. And I was in a presentation by the Philomath School Board, and they were going over their goals, and one of them ended with, and no exceptions. And I think I also saw that up on the video here some of the wording from Question Barlow. And it just stuck in my mind because I do believe that there are going to be exceptions, and until I can get that idea out of my mind, I'll probably not do as well as I could in being more helpful. So thanks to the department for the opportunity to attend. I felt it was a really well-run conference by OSBA, and very happy to be a part of it. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to turn to folks online, on the phone, excuse me, and I'll start with Kimberly Howard. Give them a second.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Beautiful fall morning. Sorry that I'm not there in person. Thank you for understanding. I had a last-minute auto issue. I was also attended the OSBA conference and had the honor of introducing the Teacher of the Year, Mercedes Munoz, before her amazing and inspiring words. So I echo Jerry on that, and also honoring our very own Superintendent of the Year as well. I also echo Jerry on Dr. Bryant's very thought-provoking and moving at times presentation, and was reminded of the ways in which bias, and implicit or explicit, can weigh upon a young person. And I was particularly moved by the term of a personal brand, and imagining, he asked us all to imagine if our personal brand was put on us by someone else, the way that Barry has already described the images that people have, or the words that come to mind when they think of African American males. And that is the brand that has been put on them. And so the trying to work upstream of that every day of your life, when you're young and when you're old, can take its toll. So it was a really powerful and empathetic way for us all to see how, while our bias may not be intentionally meant to hurt, it can impede people from learning by creating barriers to having a strong inner life that supports itself because the external forces are pressing down. That led me to the breakout from students in the Beaverton School District and our very own Roshan. Wow, also very powerful. And what I took away from that, I think, was a buzz that I was hearing throughout the entire conference. It is our job as the adults on the school boards, the adults in the administration, the adults in the building and in the classroom, to know that our history as a country, the United States, our history, the history of our systems, the history of our policies and our institutions and how they were created. We need to know that, and we then need to understand how it impacts our individual students, in particular our students of color, but also our students navigating poverty. And until the adults understand that on their own, do the research on their own, do the reading on their own, they're going to continue to put pressure on the young people to tell them how they should be navigating the space. And that adds an extra burden on our students, that they are already trying to feel safe when they are in school. And then it is our job as the adults to make sure that every student understands our history and our systems and our policy and our institutions and how they have built the institutions that we are now in the middle of, and how that impacts the student that might be sitting next to us and the student that might be sitting in front of us. And I said this at our retreat. We have a lot to do, yes, to make up for and to remove barriers for our students of color. Yes, absolutely. But we also have an obligation to help our Caucasian students understand the history, the entire history all of its intricacies and all of the things that were not good and all of the things that were great and all of the contributions by people of color so that we can move forward into a time when all of our students feel safe and our white students don't feel oppressed by what they think is now preference given to students of color. And our students of color, the barriers to learning will be removed because their personal brand is one that they can own, not one that's been put on them. And I'm fired up about it. And I'm fired up about it because the adults were arguing amongst each other in front of students. And that is not okay. We need to own what we need to own as the adults in the room. We need to then remember what it is to be a young person and the kinds of supports that young people need. So yes, they need to have a voice. They want to have a voice, but they need to be supported in having a voice, knowing that their voice is heard and that actions will be taken by what they ask for, but that also we are out ahead of them and we are providing safe spaces before they have to ask for it. And that is the last thing that I took from the gentleman who ended our the conversation about hope. Our job as treasure hunters is to find the gold in every single student that passes through the doors of our Oregon schools and help them see their gold, their assets, their strengths. Help them own a personal brand that is filled with affirmation that they are a treasure. That's what I took away from that conference, and I hope that we can keep elevating that from this platform of the state board so we can make that a reality for our students. That's my report today.
Thank you, Kimberly. I have on my list Guadalupe.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm also very sorry that I can't be there today. We have also another very important meeting on our campus. It has to do with some federal funding, so I was not able to attend in person. And so I apologize to the new members and to the presenters for today, because I feel horrible that I won't be there to hear the presentations in person. I also will have to exit the meeting right around 10:50 to move on to my next meeting. So my apologies for being mostly absent today. I want to also echo what both Jerry and Kimberly have already mentioned about the OSBA convention. I had the opportunity to attend as well. Thank you, Department of Education leadership, for the fantastic job you guys did in your presentations at the convention, and for your participation in general for making it possible for us to attend as well. It was absolutely enriching in so many different ways, and some of the things that Jerry and Kimberly have already said, I won't repeat. I just want to echo the energy that both of my colleagues have brought forward as a result of the convention. I do want to say, even after their reports, that I feel like when I was at the convention that there are numerous things that we have to celebrate with regard to accomplishments in diversity, equity, and inclusion at the state level. So many things. The fact that we had these fantastic speakers that are sharing, not just sharing, but educating us, bringing us the opportunity as leaders in the state of Oregon, the opportunity to grow and learn from our own mistakes. So there's a lot of glimmers of hope that are happening. At the same time, there are a lot of areas that we need to do some major changing and growing in. You know, when I started attending some of the sessions at the convention, I had the opportunity to interact with people more on a one-on-one and hear some of the conversations, and so it's very real that there needs to be a lot of growth throughout the state. The people that directly touch our students, there's a lot of work to be done. So while I applaud all of us, everybody who made this conference happen, and beyond that, the Student Success Act, the work that is going into it, while it's merit worthy of a huge applause and commendation, there is so much work that needs to be done at the local level, and that I hope that we can be a catalyst in changing or making that change occur. One of the sessions that I attended was the trauma-informed approaches that was led by the Tualatin Tigard School District. And the conversation there led to a statement that I don't think I'm ever going to forget. One of the presenters, I believe, was the individual that said that somebody in the group said that change is taking place, and I believe one of the presenters was the individual that replied with, change is happening, but our kids only have one chance at 8th grade. They only have one chance. And they also only have one chance at every day in their experience in school. There's no repeat for them. So what we make of this experience is super important, of course. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's very important to remember those very succinct moments and pivotal moments. One of the other things that beyond the OSBA and the celebration of the Student Success Act, thank you to Scott Nines. He did a fantastic general session on the Student Success Act. Jerry mentioned that already, so I appreciate the fact that information is getting out there to the school districts. At one of the other sessions that I attended, which was on racism, I can't recall the title of the session, but one of the comments that an attender, or rather an attendee, made during the session was that students can't tackle inequity or racism because they can't see it. And that was one of those moments, again, that I think is going to stick with me for a very long time. So I started thinking after that comment was made, what is it that we can do? Because oftentimes it's also invisible to us. So what is it that we can do to make it visible for students? And so I'm hoping that the work that's being done with the communities, by the school districts, and even by our own Department of Education leadership, that we are very intentional about the purpose, the reason why we have this possibility through the Student Success Act, what it is that it is addressing, and not to forget that it is there that it has been given to us as a gift to improve the opportunities for the students in our school districts who can't seem to figure out how to work in a system that is not made for them to succeed. So I hope that the Student Success Act is a catalyst for change, for a major change, so that it makes the system a system that is friendlier to those students, the black students, the brown students, the poor students, all of the students who are part of that gap that just seems to get bigger and bigger, no matter how much time and how much golden nuggets we have in all of our attempts. that gap continues to be persistent, and it continues to impact those students who only have one opportunity to do their 8th grade and one opportunity to do their school years, period. So I'll stop there because I could go on forever. Thank you. Again, the OSBA convention conference was super enlightening and inspirational in many ways. So thanks, you guys, for allowing us to attend.
Thank you, Guadalupe. I have next on my list Ryan Mann. I don't know if he's on the line. Okay. Representative Sherry Health. No? Okay. Alyssa Nessler.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am also very sorry that I can't be there in person today, but I am very happy to be able to share with you over the phone and to be able to hear everyone's very, very powerful reports this morning. So thank you for that. I'd like to say congratulations again to our Superintendent of the Year. And I'd also like to offer a warm welcome and congratulations to Jennifer Skurlock. I'm so happy that she is joining this body, and I know she's going to be a wonderful addition. So that's great to have you here today. For my report today, I'd like to just share that as we move forward in gathering stakeholder feedback in this stage of implementing the Student Success Act, I'd like to take a moment to share my lived experience going through this process as a staff person in a district, as well as a community member of the district that I work in. First, I'd like to say that there's a lot of effort and good intentions involved in this information gathering. I think that there's an overwhelming sense that we don't want to let this opportunity pass us by. However, I'd like to share that there are some real roadblocks to gathering valuable information and including voices that are not traditionally heard, especially when you're talking with building educators and students, who are some very critical stakeholders in this process. However, these groups, while these groups are very important, sometimes they're the least informed or have the least access to information about this information stakeholder engagement process that we continue to discuss. I'd like to continue to see and hear these voices centralized moving forward. This work is very challenging, and overcoming these obstacles to inclusion is not an easy task. There are lots of questions on the part of educators about how to give feedback and how to give feedback in a manner that's going to result in resources that will meet the needs of all of our students. And I think that there's a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of frustration and some misunderstandings as well. In the end, when this information is gathered and this feedback has been collected and plans for funding are designed and submitted, there is likely going to be changes and improvements to implement in our district systems. Educators are frequently expected to implement plans and initiatives without being asked to provide input or without a forum to give input in a meaningful way that expresses their needs and encourages a broad array of perspectives. What I hear from educators most frequently and what I feel personally when discussing this process is that they want to be heard. They want to tell their stories, and most importantly, they want to elevate their students' stories. They want education leaders to understand the challenges that are faced on a day-to-day basis in our classrooms. Educators want to emphasize the challenges around having 38 fourth grade students in a classroom. They want to explain how mental health supports are necessary because they alone do not have the resources to help the student or students who are throwing chairs in their classrooms on a regular, ongoing basis. They want decision makers to hear how defeating it is to come to work and not have basic materials they need to do their jobs, like books, classroom supplies, or enough chairs and desks. They want to explain that they're overwhelmed and on the verge of burnout. Our educators are expected to provide high-quality instruction in a manner that is trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and socially emotionally sound to all students every day, and they really want to be able to do this. However, this feels daunting and isolating when many educators have not been provided the quality, ongoing professional learning they would need in order to do this to meet these expectations. In the midst of this great time of change and transition, we have tremendously talented educators that are looking for work outside of the classroom. There's more teachers that I can count within the last month or two that have told me that they are looking to leave the profession. There's an overwhelming sense of not feeling supported and of not knowing how to meet the diverse needs of all students while simultaneously being the adult in the room who's facing these students every day and trying the best that they can. I've had the opportunity to discuss the idea of engaging stakeholders in a new way with many educators from my district as well as districts across the state. And the message that comes across is that educators want the opportunity to articulate the needs of their students, their classrooms, and their schools to ensure that the next steps in this process will really address the root causes of these pressing issues in order to work toward real, sustainable change. So that's my report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Lauren?
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you for letting me still be in school and take this call. I apologize for not being here today. But for my report, I wanted to talk about a leadership conference I attended earlier this month. I went to something that the Oregon Association of Student Council held, and we heard a couple speakers talk, and one of them really was powerful to me, and his name was Carlos Odejos Jr., and he was talking about his experiences in high school and how that has shaped him into the person he was. He grew up in an environment where everyone thought that he would not graduate, and he didn't think he would graduate because of the staff members who were very discouraging to him. But one day he went into the counseling room and assumed like he was in trouble, but he had a staff member tell him that he wanted to be a supporter and believed in him and really helped him throughout the process of college applications and took him to college tours and helped him through the SATs, which I know as a student now, it's really pressuring and nerve-wracking to do the SATs, so I can't imagine how it was for him. But the staff member really changed his life, and I feel like we need a lot more educators and staff members at our school who can take the time to encourage our students and give them the opportunities to succeed. And in a time where some students don't have the resources to find these college tours, to offer them a path where they can succeed in those ways. And so I thought that was very empowering, and as students, I feel like we should also encourage each other to not think pessimistically about the outcome in life and just to think about like studying hard and being able to reach out to others to get those opportunities to succeed. And he also talked about having a hearing disability that he didn't know that he had until he was around his mid-20s. And when he had learned about that, he had learned that most of his hearing was gone. And, you know, growing up, he talked about how everyone thought he was a slow learner and he was always falling behind. And he stopped raising his hand to ask to repeat what his notes were because he felt excluded from the learning environment. And it kind of opened my mind to why some students are not performing to the school standards. And it got me thinking that teachers and students need to learn about the signs that someone may have a disability and it needs to be seen earlier, and we need to have resources for them in order to help them succeed just like everyone else. Like, there are some students who may need more help than others, and I feel like in a time where class sizes are so big, it's hard and difficult to recognize these signs and be able to offer the support. But I feel like we need to be, as people who are staff members at schools, they're the people who can influence the futures of students' lives. And I feel like if they could have training for signs of disabilities and mental health issues. Like, I feel like this could be a huge step for them to creating a future and foundation for these students to succeed. And that's what I have for today. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Roshan?
All right, good morning, everyone. Once again, I'd like to extend my apologies for not being able to be there today, but I'd like to thank all of the board members for still allowing me to share my thoughts. And some of the things that have really been on my mind, as Mrs. Howard echoed earlier, was I recently also had the opportunity to attend the OSBA conference, and I had the opportunity to be there as a student presenter for one of the presentations. It was Walk in My Shoes, it was called, and I'd been invited by one of my school district board members to be one of 3 student presenters to kind of speak on some of our experiences with racial equity and kind of microaggressive problems in schools. And it was like a lot of the events that I've gone to, it was really, really eye-opening and enriching experience. I go to these things like the OEA Symposium and the OSBA conference, and each time I come away with more and more of a perspective on what kind of things are on people's minds and how people really feel about the issues that face Oregon schools today. But specifically, it was, we had a conversation about kind of how do we combat an ongoing problem with discrimination and kind of inequity for students of color, even in areas that are supposedly very, very progressive. And, you know, with being mindful of not trying to be too repetitive, it became a very, very in-depth discussion. But one of the biggest things I took away from the conference was the conversations that I got to have with some of the people there. I got to talk to Tom Collette. He is another one of the members of my school district board, and we had a really long discussion about kind of where, or at least the things that I saw in school that I think could be remedied by better policy that comes from the top level. And one of the things that was most concerning to me, and it's been a concern for a lot of us for a while, has been the desire for a lot of teachers to exit their position and leave teaching overall, especially teachers of color. One of the things that we talked about in our presentation was that a lot of times teachers of color, because they are not very numerous and they are in the disparate minority of teachers in the school, oftentimes they are left as the kind of carrying a lot of the emotional baggage of a lot of the students of color who feel like they can't really go to their white teachers and talk to them about the discriminatory or harassment issues that they've been facing on the basis of race. And it's a really exhausting cycle. And I think that overall, teachers, that we've seen in Oregon, between budget cuts and having them have to have been laid off versus people just getting exhausted with their teaching position have had to leave. And it's quite sad to see, but like some sentiments that were echoed earlier, I do hope the Student Success Act serves as kind of a catalyst for change. I know that from my rather surface level knowledge of it, that there will be a lot more funds available to distribute to school districts from the Student Success Act. And I guess as the state board, it's up to the members of the state board to decide where that money goes. But I think that one of the things that is especially important to me, speaking from the conversations that I had with members at the OSBA conference, is that kind of prioritization of how do we decrease class sizes, how do we get better pay for teachers, how do we get teachers to feel less exhausted with their work, because I think that a lot of times students forget to stop and appreciate the selflessness that the teachers have in their profession. And so I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing how the Student Success Act as something that takes money to divert and has a kind of guideline as to how to spend that money, how that serves as a catalyst to advance diversity, equality, and inclusivity. And I think that as being on as a student advisor on the state board is going to give me a much better perspective on that, and I'm very grateful. So that's kind of what's been on my mind in terms of education. So once again, very glad to be here, and thank you all for letting me share.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So I'm just so you know, I'm the last person to report out. So yeah. So I just would echo a lot of OSBA. I think for me, a couple of big things. It was a great conference. I was in one of the workshops with the school to prison pipeline, and I will say at the very least that became a very robust conversation. And not everybody's on the same page with that, and we've got a lot of work to do with that. It impacts obviously students of color, people with disabilities, and I think there's a lot of work in that area to do as K-12 in that, so we can change that direction. I also wanted to echo about the culture of hope. It reminded me actually a lot of work in Woodburn, because all he was really saying, the presenter, was it's their mindset. It's how we communicate with people and how we hear what people say to us. And again, I said this before, the Student Success Act, it's a great investment, but it's not all about the money. It wasn't about the money in Woodburn 15, 20 years ago. We didn't have a $2 billion investment, but we did have is people's time and talent, right? And then I think when we made it more equitable and inclusive in our strategic planning process, and we did a lot of listening more than talking to parents, that's what really was a big turnaround for our community. So, and then speaking of hope, again, I gotta give kudos to Superintendent of the Year, Dr. Gustavo Balderos. I don't know if you know, but he was the first Latina to ever receive that award in the state of Oregon's history. So it was a proud moment for me as a Latino, and I know for the Latino community. So thank you very much. And you, by receiving that award, you brought a lot of hope to a lot of people across the state, and not only the Latino community. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. So appreciate that. And also, again, Mercedes Munoz was the Teacher of the Year. Again, inspiring words. I also want to just talk about really quick about the Student Success Act and the community engagement that's going on. And I would just wanted to echo that we have to push hard during this time. We have to be intentional. I said last time we have to grow the tent. It's hard to get some of the people that have never been at the table before, but this is the time, a moment in time that we really need to. So I'm encouraging any superintendents and staff, principals, to really work hard into getting the true reflection of your community in those opportunities to meet. I've heard mixed reviews. And I think that, again, we all have to just push, because this is one of those moments in time where we need to hear from everyone. I also presented at OSBA with Colt and a lot of our other partners. It was OSAA, OSBA, COSA, and Oregon Department of Education on the equity and civil rights and school-sponsored activities. And just in case you don't know what that means, is last year my daughter was subjected to racism, discrimination, racial slurs at an athletic event. And so I was somewhat the catalyst to get this ball rolling. And so it has taken on a positive life of its own. And so I was honored and able to present. But also, too, I wanted to say that yesterday I attended a hearing that the OSA gave in front of legislators, kind of an update on where we're at. So it's exciting. I think our next, there is no finish line in this work. We'll continue to do. We've done a lot in a short period of time. Our next piece is really just like a large communication campaign. And so we're going to be working hard on that. I'll leave you with one thing is, so that team of young Latinas who were subjected to these racial, this racism, I guess, at this high school, last Saturday won the state championship. And so, I want to give them, a round of applause. If we can, I'll take that. We'll take that. So, just the perseverance in them. it wasn't about that for them, and probably nobody really, but for me, it kind of felt it was nice to be able to see those young, strong Latino girls persevere and overcome a lot of things. It represents a lot more than just sports. It represents girls in sports and Latinas and girls of color, and it's a different experience, going through sports in Oregon. So person of color has experienced it, it's just different and sometimes a little bit harder. So with that, again, we're really happy. It's a really proud moment for our community, and that's what I'll keep it a little bit brief, and I'll turn it over to our director and for a director's report.
Chair.
Oh, yes.
This is Sherry Held.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry, I couldn't get my mute button
Oh, okay.
off when you called me. I was talking, and then I was like, oh no.
We didn't hear you.
So
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. Give your report.
That's okay. I just wanted to thank everybody for their thoughtful comments today. I wanted to thank you for attending the hearing yesterday. It was fun to see you in a different role and capacity, and for your advocacy as well on that. In the state legislature, I am working on a bill this session to get more equity and access for kids that are coming out of high school to our community colleges. I believe that the math placement test has been holding a lot of kids back from getting into community college, and so I'm working with them on math placement tests, and I will be bringing forward a bill to address that this session. We're also working in my Human Services and Housing Committee on Human Services and Housing. We are working on homeless, unaccompanied youth, minors, and trying to get more funding for them. And so those are some of the big topics that I'm working on this session around kids and our youth. And I wanted to thank everybody for their thoughtful comments and sharing everything. Since I didn't attend OSDA, it was very helpful for me to listen to what you guys brought back. So thank you for your time, and I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Representative Held, for jumping in. And I apologize for skipping over you, but yeah, we didn't hear you, so thank you for jumping in.
No problem.
Yep. So we'll turn it over to Cole.
Thank you. I will keep it very brief as well. I was also at the Oregon School Board's meeting, but I think everything has been said, that there were both powerful and some really challenging conversations there, and I think that those will continue for the next few weeks as well. I do also very much appreciate, I think, what I would consider both the really thoughtful and critical words and inspirational words that both Gustavo Balderas and Mercedes Munoz shared. I think that they challenged the assembly and gave them hope at the same time, and just really appreciated that. With that, though, the one thing I do want to share, just as we're jumping soon into deeper discussions around the Student Success Act, is that at your table, or for the folks online on Board Book, I asked our communications team to kind of look back over the last several weeks since we've been asking our districts to engage their communities around the Student Success Act. And so they put together this compendium of articles that have been written around the state about how school districts have been going about that work. And I think that one of the things that's just really amazing about this, and yes, we can find ways that districts can do a better job of this, but we have started a statewide conversation that was not taking place previously. And every single school district is out there trying to engage communities, and some of them are learning a lot along the way. The Act calls for school districts to specifically engage with and learn from students of color, students with disabilities, emerging bilingual students, and students who are experiencing homelessness, houselessness, foster care systems, or poverty. And then also the families of those students and staff who serve the students. So those are the three groups that the districts must interact with, and they can make it broader than that, but they need to ensure that those voices are heard. The application process will ask them to demonstrate how they've done that as well, And I think that these articles are showing both that the districts are making a solid attempt to get at that request. And I also added one article that didn't make this list because it just came out yesterday. So, and the folks online don't have this one, but this is an article about Cresswell School District, so one of our smaller districts. And I thought it was great that they were vulnerable enough here to share both their first round of this, where they had about a dozen people show up to their event. And then in their second forum, they asked their special education teaching staff to specifically reach out to families. They asked their staff that serve their emerging bilingual students to specifically reach out to students and families. And then also brought in their Family Resource Center to work with families who use those services. They offered childcare, they offered translation services, and at that second forum, they had 65 people show up and offer input. And there's reference in here to some of the staff here at ODE that are helping to provide the tools necessary for school districts to do that kind of work. I think it reflects what Gustavo shared about finishing his 38th meeting yesterday. But these conversations are underway, and they are powerful, and they are providing a new opportunity for a voice into how these dollars will be used in our school districts next year. And so I just want to make sure that we know that this is happening and there's a lot of learning around it as well. And I'll stop there because I really do want to save time for the presentations later. I think there will be a lot of questions from the board.
Okay, up next we have our public comment, and I've got 4 people, and please limit your comments to up to 3 minutes, and if you have any board testimony and anything in writing, please provide that to us. So up first we have Larry Lewin. Oh.
Is this the mic right here?
Yep.
I'm Larry Lewin. I'm a retired 4J school district teacher, former U of O College of Ed adjunct instructor, now a member of OPEN, the Oregon Public Education Network. Thank you, board members, for your service to our state and this opportunity to address you. I have a question about the new SSA funds coming next year. What is the role of the Smarter Balance standardized test data in determining local school districts' application for funds? Specifically, will the Smarter Balanced assessment scores be the sole determiner in meeting the 3rd grade reading proficiency, which is one of the targeted SSA goals in the new law? I understand that Smarter Balanced is already in use across the state, so the argument that will be used is that it is financially prudent to use it for this purpose. But I argue that Smarter Balanced is not the best measure for many targets, and by using it for the purpose of SSA funding, it's only going to increase its misuse. There are many more appropriate measures of reading proficiency. I am certain that primary teachers and principals statewide know of and use better assessment tools. I urge this board to seek input from these frontline educators to provide the ODE with better assessment tools that can actually help inform teaching and learning. You have a resource on this board. Allie Nestler, who spoke remotely on the phone, is an expert in how to do this type of assessment. She and her former elementary school in the Springfield district earned a QAP grant from the OEA to do just this. I have seen Allie present with her colleagues on how they learned how to do bona fide performance assessments. She is outstanding. They can provide specific examples of authentic alternative assessments. Another example of these assessments existed. The ODA in the past funded 2 pilot programs on how to do this type of assessment, performance and formative assessment. There was a program called the PADS, P-A-D-S, Performance Assessment Demonstration Sites, and the OFAST grants, the Oregon Formative Assessment for Students and Teachers, which funded schools across the state to learn as teams in how to create teacher-made, classroom-based, curriculum-embedded, colleague-vetted, bona fide performance assessments. The money is no longer available. but it can be done, it must be done to empower teachers to do quality assessments. Where's the determination to restore this funding? Our assessment system is way out of whack. What happened to the 2015 New Pathways Pledge of a more balanced assessment system? 4 years ago, the then OEIB, under the direction of former CEO Nancy Golden and the former president of the OEA, Andy Vanderling, impaneled a group of educators statewide to talk about how we can get a more balanced system, less standardized, more teacher-made. It can come back. My question to this board is, where's the leadership who's going to step up to fix this imbalance? Second, in the little time remaining, I have another question on another issue regarding the ODE's AESRP, Assessment of Essential Skills Review Panel. I applied for one of those positions back at the end of August. I never received word of receipt of my application. I emailed, I got receipt, I made the deadline, but since then I can't find out the process of how this is going to be handled. Back in September 3rd, I emailed asking, I got a word back.
Sir, I'll ask you to wrap up your comments.
Pardon?
Can you wrap up your comments? We have others.
10 seconds away.
All right, great.
Thank you. On September 3rd, saying the decision will be in coming weeks. I emailed back on October 13th, saying it's coming very soon. I emailed again on November 8th without any reply. I've applied, I'm interested in serving. I need to know what the process is.
Thank you.
If you have any additional comments beyond the 3 minutes, feel free to email our public email address. Those will be posted up on Board Book for the entire board and public to see. That is stateboard.publicemail@ode.state.or.us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Up next, we have Roscoe Karen.
Zoe, I have written comments. Can I give them to you now? My name is Roscoe Karen. I'm a retired 4J middle school teacher and a member of the Community Alliance for Public Education, CAPE, and OPEC, mentioned by Larry. So Jennifer, congratulations. Thank you. I remember Jennifer when she first began her student teaching. Members of the State Board, the term Gilded Age refers to the era of tremendous concentration of wealth and overarching corporate influence in the U.S. between the 1870s and the early 1900s. Overall, both the Democratic and Republican parties were allies of corporate forces during this period of corruption and legal and bureaucratic expediency. It is generally agreed that we are now living in a new Gilded Age, this one beginning in the 1980s. Certainly one manifestation of the extent of present-day corporate influence is the dominance of the corporate reform model of education in pre-kindergarten through grade 12 in Oregon and all across the United States. This corporate model, with its genesis going back to the Reagan administration's A Nation at Risk, has transformed public education into something that many of us no longer recognize. Corporate entities and billionaires have spent untold amounts of money in advancing their interests in their vision of public education in the new Gilded Age. The elements of this model include the building of a narrative of distrust in teachers and teacher unions, top-down management that minimizes the professional role of teachers in their own classrooms, the defunding of public education, the promotion of corporate charter chains, and an obsession with standardized testing, data gathering, and data processing. I am not alone in the belief that the corporate model itself and the associated entities that advance it have done incalculable damage to students, families, and teachers, have contorted the education that many students have received, especially the youngest of children, have siphoned off billions of tax dollars to the ever-growing testing, data collecting industrial complex, and have endangered democracy itself. Historically, the State Board and the ODE have held the opposite to be true, that the corporate model and all of its elements are what public education should be, and that critics of the corporate model are, in essence, ill-informed cranks. Over the past 2 decades, the State Board and the ODE have been perceived by more people than you may realize to be cheerleading, true believing adherents of, apologists for, and pugilistic guardians of the dominance of corporate influence on public education. Members of the board, the State Board and the ODE have played a historic role in advancing the new Gilded Age. Chair, may I have about 15 more seconds to conclude? Thank you. Historic role in advancing the new Gilded Age vision of public education and in pushing back against efforts to question the model and to point out the great damage being done. These pushbacks have included active and passive efforts to minimize and thwart parents exercising their lawful right to opt out. Members of the board, it is certainly not too late to change course and to return to a public education that is in the interest of the public. Perhaps this is a moment of change. That would be a courageous, integral, and ethical decision on your part. Thank you.
Aaron Cook.
Thank you, Board Chair. My name is Aaron Cook, and I currently work with the Southern Oregon ESD. I'm giving public comment today around the proposed rules for the summer school programs. One of the pieces I wanted to potentially ask the board if there was clarification on, or if they could look into whether it was legally feasible to add under the eligibility for summer grant programs, section 1, where it says the following entities are eligible to receive SSA summer school grants. It lists 2. One is a public school district on behalf of an eligible school, and one is an eligible public charter school. I would like to for your consideration whether it would be feasible to add a third, which would be an ESD for regional summer school programs. One of the pieces that we would suggest, we currently have networks of partners at the ESD who provide extracurricular and co-curricular programs outside the school day. But we do that for many of the small schools in our area. Oregon has a number of small schools, and it's often very difficult for the smaller schools to run these types of programs, but they could collectively work with an ESD to do so. That is allowable under the current rules that we can be contracted by school districts or by charter schools to run those, but it would then not necessarily be a regionalized program. It would be for specifically a school from a district or a charter. I'm not sure if that's something that your legal counsel will need to look at, whether it's allowable under the legislation, but I would just like you to consider that to see whether it's an option, because the ESDs do have the ability to actually offer regionalized programs, especially in the STEM area, which is one of the specialties that we do. And we were hoping that, or I was hoping to just bring it up to your attention to see whether that was a consideration that you could make, potentially whether it was allowable for ESDs to be direct recipients of funding so that they could do regional summer school programs.
Thank you. So up next we have Ross Schwartzentruber. I hope I won't. Did you justice?
So good morning, Chair Martinez and members. My name is Ross Schwartzentruber. I'm a parent with 3 children in the Salem-Keizer School District. And today, when I was writing my testimony, I was listening to the impeachment hearings. I don't know, you guys been listening to the impeachment hearings? It's really interesting because when I go on social media, I can look at 2 different feeds and see 2 different exactly polarized opposite truths that different groups of Americans believe. And that brought me to thinking of the Hannah Arendt quote from The Origins of Totalitarianism. In an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, the masses had reached the point where they would, at the same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and that nothing was true. In 1841, Methodist Jason Lee opened the Indian Manual Training School, which enforced child separation and assimilation policies in education and resulted in student deaths. These policies remain at Chemawa nearly 200 years later, and even congressional oversight is unable to slow the rise of behavior incidents and student deaths. In January of 1856, 480 Cow Creek, Umpqua, Molalla, and Kalapuya people were removed overland to the Grand Ronde Reservation on the Yamhill River using forced migration policies. Last month, October 2019, in Salem, Oregon, hundreds of houseless American citizens were removed from Salem public property using the same forced migration policies. In 1917, the Oregon State Legislature created the State Board of Eugenics, which administered standardized mental tests created to sort and rank people in an effort to identify the feeble-minded for involuntary sterilization. By the time the law finally changed in 1983, more than 2,600 Oregonians had been sterilized, many at the State Hospital, Oregon State Prison, Fairview Training Center, all located here in Salem. Child separation, assimilation, forced migration, standardized testing, and sterilizations are all tools of eugenics, a thoroughly disproven theory linking melanin levels to intelligence, achievement, and success in humans. As we consider how we go forward in Oregon education, I would ask us to consider that as American citizens and Oregon residents, we have a duty to do what's right for our kids, and that we should stop believing in the psychometricians. Look around at your schools and start believing in our own lying eyes. Stop using SBAC and start allowing local outcome measurements. In other news, the Boston Public Schools superintendent has put a moratorium on all district assessments, interims, and the main point was because of Pearson. Now, I just looked at the want ads this week. There are 7 positions open in Salem, Oregon for Pearson. Is this where our student success money is going already? They're beefing up for it. Please, think about these things, review it, appreciate your time.
Thank you. Natalie Maxfield?
Nervous. Thanks for having me, board members. My name's Natalie Maxfield. I'm a parent of many kids in the Oregon Public Schools, and I come to you today because there's things that are dividing our community, and I want the board to be aware. So my kids and many others are being driven out of the public school system by exclusionary policies that have come from the administrative rule passed in December of 2015 on human sexuality education, as well as from the health education standards and performance indicators adopted in December of 2016. The 2015 administrative ruling came from lobbyists, from advocacy groups who are now in our schools teaching a very unbalanced approach to sexuality that many parents and families do not agree with. The 2016 standards and performance indicators came with good intentions of equity, inclusion, and safety. The problems we are seeing in our district and in districts across the state is that districts are going above and beyond teaching these targets, swinging the pendulum the other direction to exclude a large portion of the population. The unbalanced approach stemming from the ODE is being perpetuated in our school districts and creating great divides in our communities. Oregon is a very diverse place. I love living here, and we value that diversity. We must find a way to come together and approach our sexual health with a balanced approach. The language of the 2015 ruling and a subsequent letter from Colt Gill to districts states that they must teach comprehensive sexuality education. This has caused some school districts to believe that learning materials must come from advocacy groups such as Planned Parenthood. Our school district even has a Planned Parenthood employee participating in the training of our teachers. One example of exclusion are teaching children at the elementary levels that gender is a choice. In my 4th grade son lesson, they are to divide out masculine and feminine traits and choose categories that they identify with. Personally, growing up a tomboy, I had a boy cut and I wanted to be exactly like my brother. A lesson like this would have made me question my body. Rather than empowering these children whose personalities, behaviors, and preferences do not conform with their societal stereotypes for their sex, such children are encouraged to question their sexual identities and explore a path of gender fluidity or even gender transition. There's a group that I've been in touch with called the Kelsey Coalition. They're parents of kids who have transgender issues, and they have put together a guide to help with the transgender issue in schools. Is that my timer? Okay.
You can send any additional comments.
I will leave this with you. I just want to thank you for your time, and I'm hoping that we can swing the pendulum back to the middle to make school a safe place for all kids and equal for all kids. And I ask that you remove the controversial substandards and stick to the national standards and remove the substandards that are causing the divide. So thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to provide public comment? Okay, so we'll move forward with our informational reports. So we'll now move into our informational update on the work the department around Student Success Act, implementing the Student Success Act. After Scott is done presenting his slides, which are all available on the board book, I'll go down my list of members that are not present and check in with them to see if they have any questions, and of course around our table today.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Belize and members of the board, and I need to turn this on.
Yeah,
right?
just make it big, yes.
I appreciate the chance to spend some time giving you an overview and an update in some ways around the Student Success Act, but primarily focusing on the Student Investment Account and its implementation. A quick check before I begin on time. I want to make sure I'm balancing time, and I'd planned for about a 25-minute presentation and time for questions. It would give us about 45 minutes. Is that still right, or should I try to move more quickly?
Just a little bit.
I'll try.
Okay. No, that's fine. No, go ahead.
Okay.
You're fine.
Before I start to move you through the slides, I just want to note a couple of things. First, there, in your own reports, there was this sentiment about both progress and there just being so much work to be done. And I think it's my 14th week, and I'm really clear about the progress that we are making and ground we're making, but the weight and arc of what really, to your point, Chair Belize, is not, the investment is an expression of hope from parents and families and communities and educators, all trying to think about how we move into this kind of turning point and change how we both gather input and how our teaching and learning practices change. And what I've been saying recently is it's only a turning point if we turn. And I do see great effort among school leaders and community organizers and activists and teachers all trying to figure out this new investment and what it asks of and what the legislation requires. And I'm also very clear of the weight and responsibility that I think we all share in that. And if I have a kind of headline message, it's just to continue to please embrace the responsibility of everyone to implement not just this legislation, but really what is the vision for the Oregon education system that we want for each and every child. The last thing I'll say before I begin is just that I'm clear from an approach, and you're certainly welcome to give feedback, that as we try to move rapidly to give clarity to districts and in a sense get the kind of mechanics of implementation moving, that get us to the point where we can actually dig into the work at depth and have really important conversations about improved community engagement strategies and work, improved changes in teaching and learning, and even changes in assessment. But we have to, in a sense, get the pieces together to be able to even give that conversation a chance. Otherwise, we'll very rapidly be like, none of this works. So I'm very focused on trying to talk you through the kind of structures and the mechanics, but I don't want that to lose sight of the important depth to the legislation and what I hope will help unfold over time. So the Student Success Act, as you might remember, includes an investment that all told is projected to be $2 billion a biennium, $1 billion a year. It has 12 new programs, including the Student Investment Account, and 16 expanded and enhanced programs. again, and I noticed actually your clarity about the Student Investment Account and the Student Success Act, but there remains for folks confusion about those things, as well as what makes up the statewide education initiatives. And so constant teaching and sharing is a really critical role that you can play. I did want to just briefly show you how all that work is housed within the department. And while I appreciate the positive words and comments, it really is a whole team effort, and there are really great work happening across the agency at many different levels. But I thought it might be helpful to show you where the work is housed for all of those investments very briefly. So I'm not going to go in detail about each of these slides, but I think it's worth showing you how different aspects of the Student Success Act fit within each of the different divisions within ODE.
Just,
Yeah, the
Mr.
question.
Chair, Scott, do you want us to ask you questions as you go through, or would you prefer us to hold them and wait till you
If-
do the presentations?
I would probably prefer that you hold, but if it's like a burning, I'm fine if it's like, I really got to get it in now, but if you can otherwise maybe let me get through the whole thing, I would prefer.
Scott, can I just add, it would be, because we have so many people on the phone, we thought today would be better if you could just go all the way through, and that way we can cycle in the phone people and make sure we don't leave
Yeah,
anybody out.
okay, that's great. So, but please write them down, and happy to. Generally, I'm fine being interrupted. I have 3 kids, so. Okay, so Early Learning Division houses a number of important programs. You can see where the Youth Development Division leads on the statewide youth re-engagement system. The Educator Advancement Council is leading work around Section 48 within the Act. The Office of Indian Education leading work on the American Indian Alaska Native Success Plan. Again, I won't go through in detail of each of these, but I think it's worth seeing. You've got roles for the Office of the Director. The office that I lead, the Office of Education and Innovation Improvement, is responsible for the Student Investment Account, and in the organizational rebalancing, the high school success effort has moved over into that office, which was fully funded within the Student Success Act. The Office of Enhancing Student Opportunities holds the summer programs for Title I and the EIECSE expansion. The Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion has a number of important roles and responsibilities, as does the Office of Finance, Information, and Technology, and the Office of Research and Data Analysis, a huge nutrition program that's built into the Act. Again, I'm only going to focus on the Student Investment Account, and it's worth saying that there are really important offices within the agency that are not listed there that are core to the success. So you might notice something like the Office of Teaching and Learning is not there, but it's a critical engine for the entire Act to unfold, but a specific. Here, we're just tracking where the specific initiatives within the Act are housed in terms of a kind of technical leadership standpoint. Within the Student Investment Account, there is 2 primary purposes of that account set forth by the Joint Committee on Student Success. And as I'm out talking with district and community folks, I think it's really important to think about these 2 purposes as the kind of principle that you come back to if you're at any point you're in doubt, right? Which is to meet students' mental and behavioral health needs and to reduce academic disparities and increase achievement in these focal populations. So those categories: students of color, students with disabilities, emerging bilingual students, students navigating poverty, homelessness, houselessness, and foster care, and room, as we'll get into in rulemaking over the next year, that might also be determined by the State Board of Education. You all understand very deeply that equity is central both to the agency's overall vision, but to the implementation of this work in law. Your opening comments all speak very much to that. I'll just name a couple of things that I think are important. Again, to this idea of obligation and where we center equity. One of the mistakes we could make is to only focus on the Student Success Act, as important as it is, right? Something like Senate Bill 13, this ability to actually tell the truth about Oregon's history as it relates to First Nations people is a critical pairing with something like the Student Success Act, because it names essentially a place that we start as a foundation, that every student will actually understand the history of First Nations and an essential set of understandings. That offers an equity-based framework to think about all students of color and how we think about how something like that, which isn't in this act, but is something that should be unfolding and being rolled out across Oregon's communities, is a way to think about how these pieces all fit together. I do think that we have a lot of work to do to grow across each and every district in Oregon our skill and ability to deal with, in particularly racial conflict, but also gaps around ability and class and other types of difference. But there are very different sets of skills, and to be candid, very different beliefs from school boards in different communities. And as someone said, Oregon is a very big and diverse state, and my belief showing up to this work is that we have a responsibility to each and every child. The skill with which we have to advance equity and how we get comfortable having harder conversations is one of the core things this legislation should promote. That doesn't mean that we're going to succeed right away. It doesn't mean that we've succeeded in the last 30 years, and it doesn't mean that everything's going to suddenly be fixed in the next 6 months. But it does put resources towards a pathway to having stronger, focused conversations with expectations and accountability. The timeline and roadmap that we have unfolded since we put out this last community engagement toolkit is an important map for you to have in your own minds as you think about what districts are being asked to do and how educators and communities are being engaged. And as we talk about the kind of rulemaking that will be coming to the board over the next 9 months, which I might have buried the lead, but part of the reason for this presentation is just recognizing that a number of rules are going to be coming to you about the act as a whole, but specifically about the student investment account, and giving you kind of a deeper dive in that architecture thought might be helpful before rules just start flowing out to you. This roadmap basically lays out a process in which community engagement is underway, and hopefully not a one-time phenomenon. The law calls for meaningful, ongoing, authentic engagement. Districts are taking their broad continuous improvement work, and they are taking the needs assessment from that work and putting that together with their focal engagement with students and families and with their staff broadly, and bringing that together with an equity lens, looking at disaggregated data, looking at promising and emerging practices to help set their plans. They put forward their plans for public review sometime in the February-March time period. We don't dictate that, but that's the time window that districts will be going for public meetings. They have to have board approval. A licensed administrator has to present their plans and open period of comment. Their plans then get submitted to us during an application window that is March 2nd to April 15th. And we then will begin the period of our review to say, do they meet the application requirements? I will say a little bit more about the application requirements do not include the longitudinal performance growth targets. And I'm going to talk in a minute about those growth targets, but it's important for folks to understand that while we'll ask for districts to submit their growth targets as a draft, the bill is structured so that you do the engagement and planning work, and then once a district meets the application requirements, it says that we will co-develop and collaborate in setting those longitudinal growth targets. That's critical because one of the things that the law structures that is quite different from a kind of no child left behind mindset is the ability of actually customizing what should happen over time for each district. And so I'll talk in more detail about that, but it's important in terms of the time process because following application review, we then need to negotiate with all 197 school districts and approximately 22 charter schools who are eligible to apply independently, and then negotiate these different growth target structures to then facilitate grant agreements, which then go back through public board and open comment process, and then we begin to move payments and money and begin to implement the work. So it's important to kind of see that whole chain of events, and all of that's built into the law itself as an expectation. We have provided quite a bit of tools to districts, an initial toolkit followed by a more complete toolkit, trying to give guidance around the community engagement aspects. I see this very much about how, back to that idea of like mechanics and depth. How do we help plant seeds around what is good, meaningful, authentic engagement over time, while at the same time understand that districts are moving at a very fast rate to implement a new law? How do we help them create a stance and the tools to begin to do this either for the first time or in improved ways? And certainly we have some districts and regions that are outstanding at it, but how do we kind of see that in a thoughtful way in terms of a first year of implementation, and then where we can improve and continue to do well, while at the same time holding integrity and accountability that we don't just, like, anything goes. So there's a tension there. We've tried to provide tools and clarity about that. As I mentioned, after the community engagement process unfolds, these are the pieces that districts are expected to pull together in their planning. And what I say to districts is, The legislature gave them quite a bit of freedom in how they spend the money within the allowable uses within those two purposes, but were quite prescriptive on process. The expectation's very clear that districts are supposed to take that community input, look at the allowable uses, look at those longitudinal growth targets they're drafting, apply an equity lens and tool, and look at disaggregated data in order to inform their plan. And as much as we want to focus on good engagement, we also need to focus on actually listening and using that engagement. Or when I'm speaking, what I often say is we have habits of doing engagement here and planning here. And for those on the phone, I'm making two circular motions that are apart from each other. So that's not always the case, but it's often the case. And part of what this is investing in is the idea of getting those things to come together. And that's a practice that takes skill and time and depth and support. Obviously, districts are often interested in what can be the allowable uses, as are communities. I was at a parent meeting last night, and almost all parents of color all asking, what is this money again, and how does it get used, and what are the ways in which districts are going to decide? And I think this uneven sense of some communities feeling really informed and feeling really engaged, and they know how things are going to be planned and decided, and other ones feeling like they're getting a survey and they don't know where the information goes and they don't know how decisions are going to roll out. And we have a lot of variance across the state amongst the 197 districts. I will say on allowable uses, trying to be brief, that the details matter. So while these are categories, the legislation allows for some detail within each of these domains. It's not exclusive to the bullets, but the bullets matter. And in the materials we're providing to districts, we're often trying to make sure we include not just the categories, but those details. So for example, on reducing class size, very specifically, the legislature says an evidence-based strategy to reducing class size. There is not an evidence-based, though I really have empathy as a former teacher and having classrooms with 34 or 36 kids, there is not an evidence base that moving broadly across a whole district and reducing class size by 2 kids will change any outcomes or affect those focal groups. There are targeted approaches to class size that can be quite impactful. While districts and teachers may want class size reduction, and there are other general fund things that can be done to advance that, and we should have a goal to reduce class sizes overall, that these funds would only be used to move class sizes from 36 to 34 will miss the purpose of the bill or its expectations. So trying to be very clear about that. In each of these categories, those details are really important that people understand, right? On the application window, it is important for people to know that the application window is for submission, not for approval. It's a rolling window because we got feedback very early on that some districts wanted to apply early and some wanted it to be as late as possible. That's helpful to us from an implementation standpoint because it's a big lift to, with integrity, review all of these applications. As I said before, the bottom line here is that we are going to work with districts that apply within this window, and if they don't meet the application requirements, we're going to send it back and ask them to change. We're not going to do that with shame. We're not going to try to do that by letter grading or ranking anybody, but we do want there to be integrity in the review and meeting the application requirements. Otherwise, none of this will work over time, right? But if districts do need to meet that application window, what we've built in and you approved as temporary rules is that if you don't apply March 2nd to April 15th, your non-competitive grant allocation goes into the overall fund to be redistributed to districts so that we don't leave money sitting. So it's important that districts, and we're trying to communicate this over and over again, but you can help. Districts need to put their application in. And I understand that dates and deadlines have not always been met with a firm stop, but we've put it there. We're being very clear about that. You need to put your application in, and then we can work through processes if applications don't meet requirements. The next slide is a preview of how we're thinking about the review process at this time. This is not set. Your feedback and questions are welcome, but it is, as we move very quickly to think about how does this review happen, an outline of where we're headed. The idea would be that we basically move through a two-part review process. ODE staff, likely in pairs, would take a district's application and take the time to really review it. look at the materials that we have, look at what they've submitted in that application, and come to a recommendation about whether the district has complied with the application requirements, whether they've mostly met it and should be approved, but some small changes or work are needed, or whether there's significant work that needs to be done, or that they otherwise don't feel prepared to make a recommendation. But unlike some prior processes, not really out of critique, but just an opportunity to build more public confidence and grow capacity in the state, the idea would be that staff, rather than just doing that kind of internally, would then present their recommendation to a grant review panel. So if we played that out, you would imagine that two of us would present a district, and we would say, you know, we're presenting today the 4J school district, and here is the work that they've done. Our recommendation is that they're approved with small changes, just an example, and then you would ask clarifying questions and probing questions, and then have time for discussion, and then you would move through a protocol to essentially affirm the work of the staff or to say it needs additional review. The thought would be that that panel would be made up of a mixture of 6 to 8 folks from different parts of the community. So educators, superintendents, parents and families, and essentially we would run over the course of about 6 or 8 weeks a grant review panel every other day, about 12 districts a day, to get through this entire review process in a way that would both build statewide understanding about these systems and grow some confidence in our review process. It is a big operational lift to try to mobilize that to be ready to happen starting the 1st of April. But I do believe that it would be worth the effort in terms of the wake of trust and confidence that it would bring into the process and the way it might work. But again, this is just a review of how we're thinking about approaching it. A couple more slides. The longitudinal growth targets are an important part of this framework to understand in terms of the legislation. So the idea in the bill is that we collaborate, but the expectation from the legislature is that there be 4 kind of common overall metrics that are used and disaggregated by districts, both in their preparation of their plans, but also in developing these longitudinal performance growth targets. There's not a lot of detail given to how that structure is to work, except that they are named in terms of on-time graduation and 5-year completion rates, 9th grade on-track rates, 3rd grade reading proficiency rates, and regular attendance rates. There is an important 5th area, which we'll come to both now and when we get to talking about the first read of 3rd grade rules, that districts are allowed to add their own optional local metrics. From my perspective, this is an innovative and important part of this design because it does not limit districts to a single measure. It allows them to provide multiple optional metrics. So for example, if a district wants to use a different set of reading measures than 3rd grade reading using the current statewide assessment system and prefers 2nd grade interim and formative assessments, they could also add that as an optional measure. If they wanted to look at the learning of emerging bilingual students and add CALP scores as a measure, they could do that. If they wanted to focus on social emotional learning and racial equity, they could use the DESA assessment. So they have the ability to essentially customize how they want to be evaluated in addition to those 4 common metrics. It's important to understand in the design of the legislation. When we are developing these performance growth targets, the expectation is that we will review disaggregated data. That's an expectation in the law, that we will apply an equity lens or set of policies, and that we will, both the district and the department, identify how those focal student groups are most at risk for not meeting the performance growth targets established. Okay, so those growth targets are tied then to what is an accountability structure. It is, I think, hopefully going to avoid the mistakes of No Child Left Behind as an accountability structure, but part of what we're charged to implement is a structure that says, how do we intervene, not just when districts might do some type of mismanagement in the use of funds, but if they are not meeting these performance growth targets. We've thought quite a bit about how do we build a structure of performance growth target setting that isn't just about those metrics, but might include some leading indicators or progress markers that would be able to show progress in years 1 or 2 that are not about numbers or movement or measurement, and that we could again have some common and customized measures for each and every district. But the bill also asks that the department play a monitoring function. And while I do think we need to end the practice of being seen as a compliance organization, there is an expectation that there be a kind of capacity building function, or what I think of as kind of right amount of challenge, right amount of support. But I do think it's important that we own here, whether we like it or not, the legislature has said there is an expectation that we're going to monitor how this is going. And if we see a trend line that is really off the mark in terms of expectations, there's a place for the department to intervene. How we will intervene, with what type of skill, in what ways, there's a lot of room that we need to develop over the next few years. But we're at the point where we're needing to kind of design, essentially, what is called a coaching program, but being really clear with district superintendents about how that is going to work. The other part of the SIA is an intensive coaching program, and we talked about this previously, but that program builds the idea that somewhere between 5 or 6 and 20 districts would be invited to intensive supports. I understand this as the legislature wanting to avoid top-down takeover models or school closure models. It is invitational. It requires the school board and the superintendent to agree. It leverages research from Canada, from Michael Fullen, to build what's called the Student Success Team of both local and statewide folks, but it is a heavy intervention. It says for 4 years, this team will engage and provide recommendations about how that school meets its performance growth targets. It has the ability and expectation that it would dictate its use of SIA funds, and the expectation is that the district would accept those recommendations with an appeal process to the board. So it's important that you understand that structure and framework. It's built into the law, and we're very much working on the design and implementation, and you'll be getting additional rules, processes that will come about that. Finally, before covering a couple quick frequently asked questions, this is a preview of the guidance that we're going to be offering, we hope, in the next few weeks about all the additional aspects of SIA implementation in the early going. So where we provided guidance around the community engagement aspect of implementation, we want to provide additional guidance on supports for districts. How do you pull all the pieces together? We're going to provide an actual preview of the application. What's it going to actually ask in the first year? How are we going to review applications? Deeper preview of this longitudinal performance growth target framework. How do they go through a process to develop and draft those? Details for business managers. How do they build and track and manage those funds so that we don't get where the programmatic side of a district and the business office are doing two separate things? These types of coaching supports, the role of ESDs, and how early learning funds can be used for the student investment account. So we're working very hard to basically get as much clarity as possible to districts, knowing that we're going to learn a lot in the first year and have room to make mistakes, learn lessons. Any of you who've started up something or implemented something, a part of the work is how well we learn. How well do we listen and respond to changes, but while trying to create as much clarity as possible. I would like to very briefly touch on a couple quick frequently asked questions, and then we'll get to all of your feedback and questions. People often are still asking about how charter schools and the SIA grants work. This headline slide, I won't go into the details. Virtual charter schools are not eligible. Of the non-virtual charter schools, there is a set of criteria set in the law that allows for some charter schools to be able to apply independently, and all the rest have the potential opportunity to join a district's application if a district chooses to invite them. If a district invites them, they have to invite all of the charters they sponsor. We have notified and clarified what virtual schools are and that are not eligible. We have notified sponsoring districts if they have a charter school that could apply independently. We've already received clarity of who is eligible as charter schools, and so all of the work to execute this part has actually already been done. But in the general public or with some communities, there's still some confusion, so I wanted to reference that. We have gotten some confusion about the continuous improvement process and the student investment account. If you have more questions, I'll cover this in more depth, but essentially, the continuous improvement process and plans are an ongoing, long-term, very essential, strategic part of how we operate. They're referenced in both state statute and in our federal ESSA plan. those processes and requirements that districts report that are due December 6th. The SIA asks for a focus on those two primary purposes, the extra focal engagement and this additional window for this basically essential focused funds. I've gotten calls from a few superintendents saying, can we use our strategic plan and continuous improvement in how we plan to use the SIA funds? And the answer is, of course, absolutely yes. But you also want to make sure that you're including the focal community engagement feedback and your staff feedback for these purposes so that you're not just going off and planning something, but that you're getting those things to talk to each other. We're getting a lot of questions about allocation estimates. To give you the same information that we're providing, we hope in the next few weeks to be able to do that. It's quite complicated to get the calculations all together. You are probably seeing in the media places where districts are estimating or naming the amount they anticipate to get. That's based on numbers that are kind of floating out there between 600 and 650 ADMW. That's the daily average attendance weighted for poverty. Folks know how to make that calculation in most districts, and so maybe are expressing that, but we have not set out official calculations, but we hope to do so in the next few weeks. Two more. As we have been out on the road listening to district leaders in particular, a lot of questions have come up around that there's not an allowance for a reserve. You might remember that from the temporary rules we passed a month ago. You passed a month ago. But what do we do if we do all this engagement work, we build a really great plan, and then we go to implement the plan and we face a workforce shortage? Or the contractor we really had our heart set on to do deep racial equity work or culturally responsive teaching and learning PD isn't available. What do we do? And what we've talked about and are planning to execute is that while districts will both plan for 3 years, we'll also allow them to name basically what is their priority plan for year one, but that they can pivot to another part of their plan that they might have staged for the second year or hold as a secondary priority, so that all of this engagement process, the plans will be reviewed all at one time, and districts would have flexibility to adjust to a secondary plan as long as it still meets the requirement and intention of the law. That avoids us having to go through a really significant reapplication and review process while trying to meet the purpose of the law. So that's a direction that's important to communicate. And then finally, the account fund management. This is just the expectation and clarity that we have with school board members that these funds have a dedicated ability to account for each and every dollar and how it's going to be utilized so that we can come back and do good reporting. I'll stop there and happy to receive your questions or comments.
So thank you, Scott. What I'll do is I'll start with the folks in the room, and then I'll go down the list for those on the telephone. So I'll start with George.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I wish I'd been writing down the questions as you went along, because I have a lot of questions, and some of which I think you may have answered. But first piece for me is understanding the two pieces in your document that you talk about. One is the two initial purposes of the student investment account. First being meeting student mental and behavioral health needs, and two being increased academic achievement. So first question is that an and or an or?
Well, that's a great question, actually. So the purposes are both, and the expectation in the legislation is that districts in their plan identify what in their plan will be for the student in behavioral health and how students might be impacted on the academic side. And so, but there is no, like people have asked, like, is there a percentage, is there amount? It's very soft in that way. And what we've talked about is in the first year, leaving it open and seeing what unfolds in the actual applications, and then to review or think through what's coming in. So for now, there's quite a bit of, the expectation is that you identify how it's going to move those purposes. That's in the legislation. But the idea of any, and we're pretty clear the legislature wanted to leave a lot of room for districts to be able to make different choices. So I hope that answers that's where we are right now.
I'm going to probably have a lot of examples that I'm going to
Sure.
throw out to help me better have a clearer understanding. So, for example, if under number 1, meeting students' mental and behavioral health needs, I say we've decided that the most appropriate strategy for us is to hire nurses and mental health specialists.
Mm-hmm.
That, at least in theory, would be an approved use, is that right?
Yeah, so the, everything I'll say about that would be like, in the context that it is in relationship to, and they've demonstrated the community engagement and the use of that and their feedback, which is, right, it's important that it's not just like, is this an allowable use? Did you get to that allowable use because you did this work and it came through, and why? And then you can say, like, here's why we reached the decision for those nurses and counselors. But given that caveat, which I'll kind of say every time repeatedly, it's absolutely one of the intentions of the legislation. It's named specifically as one of the potential goals, and that would be allowed in terms of the way we're currently approaching it.
Just push it a little bit
Yeah.
more. So then I do that. Do I then have to move to the next stage of saying then how this meets students' mental health and needs and achievement for students and addresses
I see-
academic
I see-
disparities for kids
yeah.
in those categories already out?
Yeah, see where you're headed. So this is I welcome your feedback. This is a bit of I'm, being super candid. This is a bit of the puzzle, right? So you can make a case that infusion of nurses and counselors would increase health and safety and belonging, and it might show long-term, you could somehow get to seeing changes maybe in absenteeism rates. But the idea that that's going to change third grade reading or ninth grade on track in any causal way is very hard to imagine. And that districts would need to kind of write up make up a connection that doesn't exist. The bill doesn't provide a framework for how to evaluate gains in health and safety. It only provides these slow-moving, important, common metrics of a healthy education system, but they're very long-term lagging indicators. And so the question is, how do we build a framework that says, where does that work? At the same time, the legislation asks that a district in its application say, if that's where you put all of your money. Now, because many districts, it's not like you have to choose one set of things, right? But if that's where you chose to say, this is our priority plan, this is what we're wanting to do, you're still expected to say, how would your plan impact those students in that set of focal categories, and how would their academic achievement based on those metrics be impacted by your choice? Well, if you're honest, you would say it probably doesn't impact those choices, but we do think it'll impact health and safety. And as I currently understand it, we would say that's allowable even if we can't quite build a completely comprehensive shell around that as you get into the interpretation of the legislation.
Can I add one thing to that? I agree with that, and there are a number of challenges in this. But the other part is that when we talk about it in meetings like this, or even meetings that we have with superintendents, we tend to hear people talk about the professionals that they're going to hire. And it's really about the work that those professionals are doing. And the plan that gets developed needs to talk about what are the services that the children are going to receive. So we can say we're hiring more teachers, but it really is about what are the teachers doing in the classroom, the culture, the responsive practices, and the evidence-based practice that they bring to play. When we say counselors or mental health supports, we need to talk about what is the counseling that's provided. Is it guidance counseling for AVID programs to set yourself on your path to college? Is it about trauma-informed practices and resiliency building? So we really need to talk about what the actual activities are and what the programs are that the kids will experience, not just that we're hiring this set of professionals, nurses or counselors or whatever they may be.
Can you go back to the slide that had the list of 5?
The focal students?
Yeah.
I'm almost there. Under number 2?
No.
That's not what you're looking for?
The metrics. Yeah, the metrics.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yes, I want to make sure I understood this. So you said under number 5 there, a bullet 5 there, other local metrics may be used to develop applicable performance growth targets. I thought I heard you say clearly that you still had to use third grade reading proficiency rates, and that the local metrics could not be in lieu of that, but could be in addition? Is that what I'm hearing?
Let me
you say?
make sure I'm clear. So every district will be asked to develop longitudinal performance growth targets for these, we call them 4, but it's confusing because on-time graduation and 5-year completion are 2 different ones. But those ones, everyone will be asked to develop, right? But the optional category basically allows for a huge amount of variance. So if you were going to fund nurses and healthcare professionals, you would want to build some set of something in your optional metrics that's going to tie to what you think that's going to cause as a strategy that wouldn't fit in those, so that you can get some coherence between what your plan is and what you're doing. What I was also saying is that in lieu of, in addition to, right? So if I have, as a district, a view of some other metrics that I think would be better assessments of reading proficiency, and I want to target most of my work on early literacy, I can add that framework into my optional metrics. I'll still be asked to track that third grade reading, but I have this room to show this additional set of measures.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is the question about the SBAC third grade reading.
Yes.
And whether or not districts have an option to use something different.
So the answer to that is they absolutely can do something in addition to that, right? They can do whatever they want. They can build a framework to do that, but what we're proposing, you all actually get to review this, so it's the next item on the agenda, is a first read, right, about that. And what we're proposing, preview, I'll repeat myself when we get there, is that it's a longer conversation, but the idea would be that the Smarter Bounds would be the common, the current statewide assessment system for third grade reading proficiency would be what we would use as the common metric, but a district who wanted to do something in addition or different, then that absolutely could add that to their common metrics to get a fuller picture.
I have a bunch more, but this is my last one before it comes back around. The first year, as I understand it, districts will submit plans which will primarily cover the first year, and then during that first year will play out their 3-year plan. Is that right?
So districts have to provide by the legislation a 3-year plan.
Okay.
Right? So that's what they are to be developing now, right?
Okay.
So, but the funding, right, comes for 1 year, right? For just this first cycle, right? So the way I understand it is the legislature wanted to get everyone to be on the biennium cycle and to have a 4-year planning process and a 2-year funding window and reporting cycle. But because the way the new fund's going to get collected, we're essentially in the middle of a biennium. So they said only for this very first year, it's a 3-year plan with a 1-year funding and reporting. And so essentially, districts are doing a 3-year plan, 1 year of execution. We'll go through this process again, right? Hopefully we'll make that feel like there's room for them to change and adjust, and also room for them to stay the course, but they're gonna go through a process to then go for a 4-year plan, and then you'll have a 2-year financial and reporting window. Is that?
So, I think you answered this, but so here's the issue, and tell me if I'm wrong. So, they get their initial plan approved, but there's some problems with it and some concerns about some changes that need to be made. Is a district potentially going to get in the position where they've made some decisions about hiring people and putting in a program that at the end of that first year, you're gonna say, nope, these really didn't meet the criteria and you have to do something different? And districts have now made some decisions that are more long-term.
It's a complicated question because of all the different variations of ways that could play out. But the idea, so first of all, the law says that we're going to make sure districts comply with the application requirements, which includes that the plan be for allowable uses. Like any other initiative, as folks report their expenditures, there's a chance that someone puts forward a plan and then does something different than in their plan, right? Or doesn't update that plan. and gets to a place where they're out of alignment, and we would want to coach and support and engage and try to get that back on track. But the idea that you would make a plan and a set of investments, and then we would basically kind of come back in the middle of, you know, that period of time and say, wait, you did it wrong, you got to change, is not obviously a goal, because you don't want districts to do that. In fact, one of Colt's messages out to superintendents is we know it's fast, but we also know that the choices you make now and some of the hiring decisions you make now are going to be very hard for you to walk back from in a year or 2 or 3. So be really thoughtful and go deep, go as far as you can. Some districts are choosing to use the first year as like a planning year. They're planning to put a lot of their money into further engagement and to strategize, and they're gonna wait a year to put their big plans on people and movement. We need to have the ability to adjust and deepen what we're doing, but I don't think we want to like really hard turn the ship. And so partly even in rulemaking, we're saying, let's try to be clear for year 1, and then let's stage big changes so that we have some time. So if we were going to make a really hard detail shift that was going to surprise folks, I would encourage all of us to stage how that turn would happen as we implement, so that we don't catch folks off by surprise. But the details of what you're talking about and ways that could go right, there's so many variations of it. I think the principle should be we should be consistent and clear and not try to catch folks off guard.
Okay. I do have a later question about community engagement, but I suspect Anthony's gonna cover it, so I'm gonna wait and see.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from those here? Okay.
Quick question, just on clarity on the metrics. I know I've been asked regarding local metrics, and do they need to be student focused, or could they be other metrics, for example, teacher retention?
Great question. Absolutely can be broad. They don't have to just be student focused.
Thank you.
In fact, anything that's within the allowable uses could have an evaluation framework to it that would be, very different and important. One of the allowable uses is about internal operational design. How do you build instructional time and the way school is organized? That would get you to a very different set of ideas about how you assess that change. Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
I have 2 questions, Scott. The first one is, will a district be able to create a relationship over time with one person in the State Department that they can rely on and call, who will be familiar with them, as compared to working with different people from the department as a general sense? I do understand when it gets down to specifics, there may be someone else that will be of help for them. But I think I have heard in one of the earlier meetings on the continuous improvement plan that the department has set up individuals who will be working with, maybe 5 or 10 districts, but it's going to be the same individual over time. I'm wondering if we're looking at the whole program, that same thing can exist for the 197 school districts.
I appreciate the question and the input. So a couple of things I'll say, and then I think a little bit is to be, we haven't quite made a final choice about structure. We're, at the moment, a staff of 3 within my office. We're growing, so a lot of room for that. But the district school effectiveness team, I shouldn't say that. There's actually high school measure 98 and the district school effectiveness team. So that team that does that the continuous improvement work, they have organized themselves that way where there's a point for certain districts. And we do seem to get really positive feedback about that point of contact. I do think that both things are true. You want to have a good human relational contact, and at times you need specialists and expertise, and we want to be able to have the whole department be able to respond well and not have it only be one way. The other thing, though, I'll say is the legislature invested in ESDs to provide regional supports, and each ESD has moved very quickly to put in place a kind of student investment account kind of liaison to be a regional customized point of contact for districts in that region, even if that district doesn't normally participate in the ESD services, which are a few. And we've moved very quickly to get that into place. ESDs deserve a lot of credit for that. And that offers someone in the region, and then I'm having weekly Zoom calls right now, and then eventually staff will as well, to have a constant go-between with them to be able to keep them up to speed. So there is both a departmental way to view that, but I also think we're thinking about regional supports, but with this goal of how do I have someone I know I can count on and who's going to get back to me? I really hear that as an important principle.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. It makes really good sense to me, especially when we're looking at 3-year plans and if people can stay and keep that relationship going. The second question is, I was working with a district a couple nights ago and talking about when this came forward as the funding that is kind of an all-time high, and the nice thing about it is it's stable, whereas before it really couldn't be counted on. A school board member from that district saw me after the meeting and he said, well, you know, you can say that it's stable, but what's going to happen at the legislative level is when the economy turns down, yes, that piece will be stable, but they'll just go to the basic educational budget, K through 12 budget, and balance the budget by taking more money out of that. Do you understand what?
I do.
And I thought to myself, none of us know the answer to that, but I wish I could have answered in a way that maybe could have been a little bit more informed. How would you answer that question? And maybe you've had to already. Maybe it's a common question.
It is a common question. Well, I don't know if it's common. It's happened 3 or 4 times so far. The things that I have been saying are, this is legislatively passed. Folks have asked questions, and there has been some like, well, this is only good for 2 years, this is only good for 3 years. No, this is actually ongoing legislation that doesn't have a stop date unless the legislature and governor were to take a different action or choice. To your point, though, about use of funds, you know, essentially the way I look at it is there is no way to predict that future except the part that we have within our sphere of control, right? So the best thing that we can do is to try to execute as well as possible, be very clear about what we're trying to accomplish, try to communicate the timeline of progress. Systems change at the scale that this legislation is trying to promise takes 10 years. You can look at Finland, Singapore, you can look at California, Massachusetts, Canada. You don't get California, you don't get big significant changes in practice and big significant changes like this hopes for immediately. And we have to balance that with the urgency of someone was saying earlier, like, my kid's in 8th grade right now. They only got one chance right now. So we have to hold that. We have to teach the legislature and the general public about systems change. We have to change some of the ways that we've talked about schools succeeding or failing in the media. And we have to help encourage ourselves to stay the course. But obviously, I'm not in charge of the legislature or the governor. So like my job is to figure out like how do we do this as well as possible and make the case and hope that we won't make those choices if they were to come up. But there is no way to say for sure. What is clear is we got, you know, all the signs are let's dig in and go as far and as deep and as well as we can. And I'm not going to kind of spend my time focusing on something that otherwise is like out of my hands.
Thank you very much. That's a good answer.
So I'm going to actually start calling on the folks that are on the telephone. And I'll start with Vice Chair Kimberly Howard. Are you still there? And if you actually do not have a comment, then just go ahead and say pass, and we'll move on to the next person. Maybe she's not there. Okay. Second Vice Chair Guadalupe Martinez, are you there, Zapata? She may be gone too. Yeah. And is Ryan?
I don't know if Ryan is.
Ryan Mann. Okay, Representative Sherry Help. Okay, what about Alyssa Nessler?
Pass.
Lauren?
Pass.
Is that Lauren?
Yeah.
Okay, Roshun? Okay, so I actually have a couple of just questions, and not sure if we're here yet, but you know, when you talked about the review process, you talked about those folks that would be reviewing, right? And so they're going to be a cross-section of, you had mentioned different ODE and teachers and all that, but I guess I would just always say this, is that are they cross-section of Oregonians, regardless of where they are?
That's the idea.
They're urban, rural, and it's not just people that Salem, Kaiser, Woodburn, you know?
That is the idea.
So, okay, and are those gonna be in person? Are they gonna do virtual, or how's that actually gonna play out? Does anybody, is that too far ahead, thinking too far ahead?
Well, there is the, right to your point of wanting to get wide participation, right? There's pros and cons. I am a big fan of using virtual video things, and there's a cost savings to that, and ways in which actually online engagement can be scaled at the same time, given the quality and nature of it in person. So thinking through the logistics, the budget, the transportation, and how to get that participation. We are thinking about that, but we haven't set a course on that one way or the other.
Okay. And then one thing I did have of just about the funding, and I'm not, does this money, does this allocation of resources have to be spent out during a certain period of time?
Yes.
And can a district or OD or anyone hold on to have basically like have money but unspent?
I hear you.
Resources unspent, because.
Yeah.
So, that
So
was my
the,
question.
great question. So, in the temporary rules that the board passed last month, what we said for the first year, but these will be coming back for permanent rules. So you want to think about it in kind of two ways. So that for the first year, for clarity, what we said is there is no carry forward. We understood that the legislative intent is to spend the money and wanting to, there's a big desire to not have end balances and reserves or unspent funds. At the same time, we recognize the speed. And so what we built in was the ability for districts to request an extension until September 30th. So there's a process to essentially kind of extend that time frame for the funds to be spent. So that's for the districts, right? And then as we head towards permanent rules, we're doing all the stakeholder engagement feedback, and you can have, and we may, say, well, going forward from that, we want to think about it a little bit differently, but that's what's set for the first year. In terms of the department, as we work on that, what we passed in the temporary rules for the first year is what we call a prudent reserve. And that's essentially the idea that we don't actually, this tax is a new tax, it's getting collected. It's kind of like it's a different type of funding for education. So we're used to having we know exactly how much it is and we commit to it. So we have really good projections and estimates, and at the same time, we're trying to manage that. And so we've talked about what is a small amount of reserve that we would hold until we could see all the calculations come in, and then we would release that final amount. But that's not to hold back or for the department to spend. It's all still going to go to the districts. But the mechanism by which we do that is what's currently established in that temporary rule.
Okay, thank you. So are there any other questions? And George, I'll let you take the community.
I wanted to, do you have anything before I jump back there?
No, I'm fine. I think my question has been addressed, and so, thank you.
Go ahead and ask the community
I've
engagement.
got a
one, George.
couple more things. Can you go to the slide that showed, I don't know, the different entities that would be a part, starting with the early learning piece and then.
Oh, where the different parts of the SSA as a whole is housed?
Right, yeah.
Yep. There's probably a faster way to do this that I don't know.
Yeah, those, I just wanna, it's not so much a question, but a comment, that I hope that there's some kind of through line with respect to those different entities around the success of SSA. I know that the early learning folks, for example, have their own allotment, but a lot of some of the impact that we want to make starts with early learning. The youth development division and student re-engagement is about getting kids back into schools and re-engaged and so forth. So I hope the department is focusing on some kind of through line for those kinds of activities and focus. The other piece I want to mention is you talked about the ESD. And I just want to say that I really think there is an important and can be critical role for the ESDs, particularly vis-a-vis rural and small districts, and playing a part in helping those organizations, districts, be effective and come up with plans that really work to meet the goals of this thing. And then the third piece, and doesn't have to do with that, is since Anthony didn't bring it up again, although he made the statement, the community engagement piece. I know that it's all over the place, but I hope that it's getting broader as opposed to Anthony's example of the tent. I hope the tent is getting bigger and more inclusive, and that districts are thinking outside of the box in terms of how they include the voices that haven't typically been heard. So I hope there's a way that you guys are encouraging that. You know, for example, one that comes to mind is it specifically calls out foster kids in here. Our communities that have a lot of foster kids reaching out to parent foster committees or whatever those groups are that work with foster kids. So that kind of thing, that we really are broadening our thinking, and that it's not just inviting people to meetings, but maybe going to where they are and having conversations and so on. So that's just kind of just some thoughts.
Thank you.
And I would just, oh, go ahead, no.
Oh, sorry.
No.
So I'm looking at, thank you. I'm looking at page number 8, where it says reduce academic disparities and increase academic achievement. I do have a question, and I'm not sure if it's gonna fall under SIA or else it will just fall into Oregon Department of Education practices or goals for students at different grade levels. Let me give you an example. As far as disparities and increased academic achievement, sometimes in an academic setting, a teacher may teach, let's say, for example, the history of African Americans coming to the United States. And we know that this has been an issue where African American history has been taught in the state of Oregon, and this is at the national level as well, where they start African American history with slavery. Okay? And then students will share out and families will share out that there's a disengagement that happens where students are kind of go into, I guess you could say, a survival mode where they're like, I am just going to come, but I just want to get through this because my teachers obviously don't care about me or my history, and they're teaching this to my peers, and we see the decrease in academic achievement when the supports are not there. I was wondering, how is that addressed in the SIA as far as at the local, state level, or is that a different discussion? So that's just an example, and I wasn't sure how to bring that up.
It's a great question. So it is addressed, but not mandated, I guess is the words I'll use. So the legislation specifically in talking about a well-rounded education calls out culturally sustaining practice and pedagogy and names practices, both in early learning and in middle school, as critical things that districts can invest in, right? So that gives a lot of latitude for thinking about how are teachers trained and supported, right? And what are the tools or resources? The work that I was doing previous to this, we're working very hard on campaigns around culturally responsive education. And there's, and everything that you're saying both resonates and is research-based in terms of impact. What it doesn't do is say in this specific SIA, it does not specifically say every district has to approach that work. It names the targets that need to be moved. I would make the case that it would be advisable as a way to gain ground with students of color that those types of investments would be worthwhile, but it doesn't, there's not a forcing mechanism to do that. That said, the department has other initiatives that also are trying to address that, as does the ACT. So the ACT, right, it invests in the Black Student Success Plan. It also invests in several other equity-based plans that all could also have action there. So I'd say it's a both and. It's both something that is available here, but it's not a, you know, it's an essential premise that we can move that, but there's still a lot of flexibility for districts. And there are things to think about the whole system and all of the agency in terms of what we should all be trying to carry forward in terms of improved practice over time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, actually, regarding the student engagement, yeah, I mean, just to echo what George is saying, and And again, I think we gotta be intentional. I was at a, when I presented actually at the OSBA regarding the OSAA equity and civil rights, and a gentleman, I'm not sure where he was from, said, why are we starting now, right? You know, like, it's like, that's what he asked me, right? He said that to me, and I go, I agree. And so I think in community engagement, like, it shouldn't be a new, right? The tent should have already really been big, large. It's not like the students of color, just like, you know, everybody saw the trend, right? And about the homelessness, and my mother-in-law has been a foster care writer 30 years. So it's not like, you know, so I think that's where, like, I was getting a little concerned, you know, when, and I know there's a lot being done, but I like the details of a lot, because what does a lot mean, right? You can have a lot of meetings, right? But if you don't have the right people at the table, which is historically what has happened, then you get what you get. So that's this editorial, not a question, but I'm just reaffirming what George, I'm sure all of my colleagues here, and probably everybody in the audience is we have to look at ourselves too, and why we're here, right, in this community engagement, and where are the best practices, like Woodburn, because I've been there, and this is what I can talk about, that I know that we have a high percentage of people of color, and we have a high percentage in the school district, but we have that and more in community engagement. And why you can go there probably tonight and you'll see it. But there's other school districts that have just as, a pretty high percentage, you won't see it, right? So and that's just, I think that's such a critical component to this, because if we continue to miss that mark, then it puts us on a trajectory, right? That all matters, right? So like we could, you know, that whole 1 degree, you know, in a flight probably to the moon, right? That 1 degree, you're going to end up, right? That's kind of what happens in this type of process. So that's why I really am kind of an advocate for the community engagement piece, but then also who's in the room doing the reviewing, right? In the process of all these things, the data analysis, it really matters who's there, because everybody will look at it different, ask the different questions. So it's just like that whole school of business, that I'm graduated from Portland State, that I remember a professor said, the more diverse team you have from a business, the better products and services that you will be able to provide your customers. And it's that same spirit that when, you know, it's the more diverse voices we have, is we're gonna have, I think, the better outcome for which, and in this case, of our students and our families and our state, right? So, just want to put a stamp on that.
Okay, thank you.
And
Can I offer?
Go ahead, please do.
Three quick things I'd encourage you all to think about as we head down the road of rules and implementation tied to what you're saying, which is absolutely there's not like a sudden new arrival, and we, as we started with, need to pay attention to Oregon's particular history and then what the obligations and expectations should be in terms of engagement. And the skill level of districts to do this well is highly variable in real time, right? And for many districts, they've experienced 20 or 30 years of disinvestment, and then now a huge flow over the last few years of new money. What happens when you starve a system and then you fund it? You have a whole set of needs trying to be met at one time, right? We're in a great place that Oregon has chose to invest. We're one of the only states in the country where we're fully investing in public education, which is partly why I signed up for the job. What is our accountability for implementation over time? How do we know what good community engagement, what is the way to think about how to hold an expectation for districts in that context in year 1 versus where we should be in year 3, right? Who does decide that it's authentic and meaningful engagement? If you've worked in a district, you might do really good and authentic, meaningful engagement for 80% of a community, and it could even be one that actually reaches the focal groups, but there's still one more family that isn't gonna get met, didn't come to the meeting, missed the survey, and then feels like they're not being heard. And so the question becomes, at what standard, how do we hold ourselves accountable over the long period of time? And you said something really important at the beginning of the meeting, which is like, it's not just about the money, right? It's time, it's talent, it's how you approach the work, right? So the question is, how do we animate the spirit of what the bill is saying? And then how at the same time, what's our kind of at the end of the day, like the buck stops here, bottom line, for what is sufficient. That shouldn't be the way we think about it, because we don't want to build ourselves just on like, here's the lowest form of sufficient engagement. But I do think we need to think in sophisticated ways about where are we trying to head over the next 5 years, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to that engagement growing over time, and happy to continue to get input and advice about how to do that well.
Okay. Is there anybody on the phone at this moment that, I'm not sure if anybody is, but would like to, one final thought or question?
One last.
George?
Have to.
Go ahead. Jerry?
Scott, you said something at the Capitol Affairs breakfast
Yes.
on Saturday that we didn't bring out here that I think is really an important point, and I hope I say it correctly. If I don't, please change it. But you said the one big fear that you had is that the legislators and also maybe the general public will not have patience with the effort. And the feeling is that at the end of the first year or the second year, we should see all these great system changes. And then you reference many of the countries and parts of the world that do have great systems, but it's taken them a long time. And I think for all of us, we need to remember that idea that patience with this will give it viability, and lack of patience can really get in the way of making progress. And so if I heard right what you said, and if I voiced it back, I think that's a really important message for all of us to carry and keep saying.
Thank you. I think the idea of like patient urgency, right? Both have to be true, but the patient's really critical. We have, this state and other states have the habit of investing, getting a little bit down the road, beginning to get ownership and buy-in, not understanding that we're on track towards getting changes in practice and a more coherent set of efforts. And then we deconstruct it out of anxiety that we didn't fix everything within a year or two or three.
Right.
And so then we unwind the entire investment and go to the next initiative, which is why you hear teachers all the time talking about like, here we go again, this is just the next thing. And part of what we have to do is actually be clear about what we're trying to accomplish over time and stay the course so that we can allow it to mature. But the state, our state has done that as well. We've gone through several versions of very different theories of change, and we don't let them have enough time to saturate and blossom, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. We don't give them the sufficient room and oxygen to mature. And for this to work, it's got to have that.
Yes.
So I want to make a quick comment because I think Anthony's about to propose some sort of break for us. And so I want you to know that deeper in the slide deck that Scott shared with you, slides 31 through 38 specifically, describe the rulemaking process. So they describe the groups that we are engaging with, what those meetings look like. They're full-day meetings. They're very engaging. They get into even deeper into these the details than we are here because they have a little bit more time than you all have. And it also provides the adoption schedule that we're thinking we're going to go down. So what you're going to be seeing as we move through the next several months, December, January, March, on through. So that would be good for you to take a look at because once we come back from this break, we're going to be looking at a first reading for the first two permanent rules related to this.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take just a brief break and about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. We're going to finish this off, and then if anybody can stay for lunch, we'll have lunch. So is that okay with you? Is that okay?
Thank you.
But we're going to go ahead and get started with our first readings, and we have up first our student investment account, 3rd grade reading proficiency rate, and we've got Scott again, so please.
Thank you, Chair Veliz and members of the board for having me for a little bit more. gonna talk you through this first read for the rule on third grade reading. I'll just be referencing the docket and the rule itself. There are no slides for this. I will point out that the State Board was recognized in the legislation specifically to adopt further rules to define how third grade reading proficiency would be considered within the student investment account. This is the definition informs both how districts are expected to review disaggregated data in preparation for their planning, as well as it relates to the longitudinal performance growth target setting. I wrote in the docket a summary of a number of things I'd call your attention to. First, this is the first permanent rule being recommended to the State Board that has gone through a community engagement rulemaking process. Director Colt-Gill referenced the work that's been done, but it's worth naming both Tamara Dykman's work, but also the work of a number of community leaders and educators and organizations that have participated. We pulled 400 names from across the state and then asked for representatives of those different groups and organizations to come together as a standing rules advisory body. We've had attendance that's been between 50 and 60 people. We've had 3 meetings so far, and absolutely important input from that process, and gotten a lot of positive feedback about the way that it's been developed. We did discuss at length, both first in broad discussion, then in draft rule, and then in this proposed recommended rule about the nature of this recommendation. And as I put in the summary of stakeholder voice and input, it really is hard to find an agreement here. The continuum of challenges, and to be honest, it might be one of the reasons the legislature asked the State Board to consider it, is it's hard to come to something that balances the different interests of schools and leaders and community. There's a recognition amongst many folks that the statewide assessment system, which utilizes Smarter Balanced, may not be the most effective way, or people might in their own district have views about different ways to measure reading fluency and have concern about that assessment. There's concerns, and this is in the equity impact analysis as well, that we may be measuring students' ability to use the computer for the first time as much as their fluency. There's questions about the gaps between first language learners and second language learners. There's questions about making sure the rule, and we did in this case make sure it included use of the extended assessment for students with different learning needs. There were really good ideas about using other types of assessment to think about reading fluency. I mentioned previously, but again here, the use of the cognitive academic language proficiency assessment, but that doesn't come till 5th grade for most districts. What are the ways in which we think about how to consider reading proficiency? From a different perspective, there's also a concern about not having a common assessment and the ways in which moving to some menu of assessments would not allow us to disaggregate data by race and class, and what conversations might be lost if you don't have that in place, and that alternatives to the current statewide system are not in enough use or broadly utilized that you could easily switch over. And so as we considered all those different perspectives, we tried to really capture all of that different input. And then as we came to a recommendation, we determined, and this is in the policy issuer concerns, the rules being recommended now in order to support that longitudinal performance growth target setting and to clarify the nature of disaggregated data districts are to review in developing their plans. While further consideration may be due for thinking about the nature of a statewide approach to reading proficiency, it seems that the rule being recommended would provide the most consistent and clear baseline for this common metric within the SIA framework put forward by the legislature in HB 3427. If or when a new measure was agreed upon or put forward for wider adoption and collection, this rule could be revisited. Some people might say, well, you'll never get that if you don't switch to something else. I do think this is where the discussion previously about the optional metrics becomes important. By having the ability for districts to customize what they might measure around reading proficiency, it at least allows us to begin to learn all the different ways districts might measure that and be able to get information about what that future might be. But at the end of the day, the recommendation is that we use the current statewide measurement assessment system and utilize that for the student investment account, and you have the rule itself available to you for a first read. I'll stop there unless, Colt, you want to offer any additional comments.
I reinforce,
Yeah, sure.
I want to just reinforce 2 points. And one is that the need for a common assessment across all school districts is for all the reasons that Scott enumerated, and especially to know that we can continue to measure disparities between groups of students. That's super important. The other reason that this is very important is that when districts report back and we get the data on how the students are doing in relation to their investments, the department is to report en masse to the legislature about how all the school districts are doing together. So if we have some school districts using an interim measure that is at the district level, others using a different commercial product, others doing a form of formative assessment that's a classroom level based assessment, we can't put all those together into a single reference point for the state legislature to understand how all of Oregon's kids are doing. And that's a requirement of the bill. So I think that's important for you to consider as well as you think about this. And then I just wanted to reference one point that one of our folks offering public comment today, Larry Lewin, talked about former programs that the Oregon Department of Education had in place and Oregon Education Association. Some of these were actually in partnership. So he talked about OFAST and another program that were training districts and educators on formative assessment that was classroom-based, meant to change the interactions between teachers and students so that they're adjusting instruction on a very regular basis at a local level to support student learning. So you all may remember that when we put our policy option packages together in 2019 to take to the legislature, one of those that we put in front of you was an investment in a balanced assessment system that included bringing back the formative assessment supports and dollars to support those in school districts, as well as interim assessment support. The governor supported that, included it in her budget. We took that to the legislature, and the legislature did not fund that. So Oregon continues to have an assessment system that is not balanced, that is only focused on, at the state level, supporting a summative assessment that is helpful for policymakers and can be helpful at a district level to take a look at programs across the district and how they're impacting student learning. But we do need to continue to push for what Larry talked about. We need to continue to seek a more balanced system that provides teachers with the tools they need in the classroom. And those are the tools that will actually impact the instruction for students so that we'll see these numbers go up in third grade literacy. But at a state level, so we can look at how are the outcomes statewide, we still need a common assessment that's summative across all districts.
Ready for questions or comments? Questions? Anybody have it? Yes, George.
So I understand Colt's comments, and I think I agree with them. But can you tell me, I can't find it, I was trying to find it real quick. What specifically in 3427 it says about third grade reading? I know it says, well, the board may develop blah, blah, blah. But is that specifically called out in the legislation that third grade reading will be one of the metrics?
I don't have it right in front of me, although someone might be able to pull it up or cite it, but it is specifically named and defined. It doesn't determine the specific measure used, but third grade reading proficiency is the very specific phrase used both in the disaggregated data for planning and in the longitudinal performance growth target metrics.
So we can't decide we won't use third grade.
That's my understanding. That's my understanding.
We only get to decide what measurement we use of it. Is that right?
Yep, the language is, it's one of the 4 required metrics, and it says third grade reading proficiency rate means the percentage of students in the 3rd grade who are determined to be proficient or above in English language arts as determined by rules adopted by the State Board of Education.
Thank you.
Is there anybody on the phone that might have a question? Okay, with that said, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you have one more? Okay. I guess. George isn't on the phone though, so.
Just going back to the earlier conversation. A district could decide to use, in addition to the SBAC, other kinds of reading proficiency measurements that they may be using locally.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, up next, we have the Student Success Act Summer School Program Grant for Title I schools. First reading.
If there are people on the phone, this presentation has slides as well, so you'll want to bring those up and then they can let you know as they go slide by slide which one they're on.
Thanks for your patience. So, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Chair Valise and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Eric Wells. I'm an interim director in the Office of Enhancing Student Opportunities. It's my pleasure to be here today with my colleagues, Raquel Quinn and Mira Kreitzer, to present draft rules for summer programs for Title I schools for their first read. As part of the passage of the Student Success Act, the legislature provided roughly $3 million to improve student achievement in eligible schools through the implementation of summer programs at schools that are considered high poverty under Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. These summer programs will be targeted to schools that the department has identified as having a significant achievement gap between historically underserved student groups and other student groups, and as needing additional supports and interventions. In order to effectively administer these programs, the department will be asking the board to adopt rules. Today's presentation is a first read, so we'll briefly cover the rule development process so far, the opportunities that we've had for stakeholder, community, and tribal engagement, and some major points of interest within the rules we felt it was important to highlight for you. We're also happy to address whatever questions we have, or you have, to the best of our ability, or to take them back and research them to find the answer for you. As you're aware, the Student Success Act is a wonderful opportunity for the state, but it also requires significant work to be implemented well. Before I turn it over to my colleagues for the remainder of the presentation, I want to recognize the significant and excellent work they have done to bring these draft rules before the board today. I'm sure there are many others who are to be credited for their diligence in getting this presentation before you today, but of particular note, Jennifer Engberg, Tamara Dykman, Holly Carter, and my colleagues presenting with me, Mira and Raquel, have worked exceptionally hard to ensure our readiness for today's presentation. Their work is a testament to the department's ability to implement the SSA well and in a timely manner, and of significant benefit to the state. With that, allow me to recognize Mira and Raquel for the remainder of the presentation.
I think it's afternoon, right? Good afternoon. I'm Mira Kreitzer, Chair Valise, and members of the board. I have been a teacher and a principal and director, and currently I'm supporting ODE in a couple of projects. So I'm going to share just the process that we've been going through to get the stakeholder input for drafting these rules. We've had 4 primary pathways in getting input, and the first one is just what Scott was talking about, the advisory committee, so we've met with them 3 times. And the other one is the Title I-A committee of practitioners, and that one, and I know you were talking about, Ms. Wheeler, right? You were talking about rural, getting rural input, and we are making sure that in our committee that we have rural input and urban input, just getting the whole scope of what are the needs at different areas. So we've done that. And student groups, Raquel met with 100 students, 80, I think it was middle school, and 20 elementary, and she could share some of their thoughts on what they want in summer school. It was just really great. What were some of the things that they wanted?
Oh, okay. One of our 3rd graders at Howard Elementary in Eugene, she said that research tells us that recess and PE are proven to help brain development, so that we should consider that in our rules. Also, they would like to eat during a summer program. Food is very important. I had a first grade student say she was concerned about fees, that there had been fees before in the past and her mom couldn't pay the fees. And I thought that was really good input as well. Yes, and also they really wanted to learn about animals, and science as well came up. So that was just a snapshot.
So we're taking all those things into consideration as we draft the rules.
And the idea is to then go back to our students and our other stakeholder groups in an ongoing way, and so that they can see firsthand how our government works and how rules are made, and see their voice reflected in those rules.
Right. And we've done a lot of surveys, so we're getting information from them. And then these are just some examples of groups that we have met with. And you can see we're getting a lot of input on drafting these rules, but it's going to be very important as we start implementing summer programs that we continue to get input. So we're looking into having an advisory group of, hey, how are things doing? You know, that problem of practice, what's going well? And or what are some needs, and how we could do like an instructional rounds kind of a thing, and just that ongoing success of the program and not just stopping right now. So that's one of our goals. And then, as you can see, our timelines have been kind of fast. We have been getting input. We did not put anything on paper till we met with all these committees, and so we're just drafting our rules and we're revising our rules as we're getting feedback.
Okay, so the primary goal of this grant is to increase student achievement, and one of the ways in which it can do that is mitigating summer learning loss. The research is really clear that our underserved students feel the effects of summer learning loss the most. Research indicates that a student can lose up to 2 to 3 months of the previous year's learning during the summer. So if you look at a 5th grade student, by the time they end 5th grade, they could be 2 to 3 years behind their more advantaged peers. So this is a great day in Oregon. We have this wonderful opportunity with the Student Success Act to help provide summer programming. And the good news is we know that high quality summer programming works. We have 4 rules today for your consideration. We have definitions, eligibility, funding, and then program requirements. So first, if you go back, this was a key discussion point in all of our meetings with stakeholders. It was around the definition of direct academic instruction. Direct academic instruction means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and we felt it was necessary to define that. As a teacher, previous teacher and administrator, direct instruction means something very specific in the teaching world, right? You think of explicit, teacher-centered call and response instruction, and while there is a place for that type of instruction, our stakeholders felt very strongly that we needed to broaden that to include hands-on learning and inquiry-based, also to include social and emotional learning, and physical activity as well. So if, when you look at the rules, we have this definition, but under the program requirements, under letter I, you'll see the expansion of that as well. Also, as far as eligibility, these are for Title I-A eligible public schools. There's a priority on serving pre-K through 8th grade. It's a non-competitive grant. It was very important to our stakeholders that we encourage the braiding of funds to put together these programs. Also, Programs may contract with community-based organizations to help support instruction and activities. Again, it's $3 million. We're looking at a minimum base amount with a per student allocation. The first cohort, so we had a lot of discussion about summer programming. You're putting together an entire school and then taking it, then closing it in 3 to 4 weeks. It's a big deal, and everything that comes with school in summer programming. So the feedback we received was, can we make these grants longer than a year? You know, we're gonna learn a lot that first year. We're on a really fast timeline. So can it be longer than a year so that we can deepen and make our programs more robust? So cohort 1 would be for 3 years. And then after that, it would be on a biennial basis, so for 2 summers in a row. Program requirements, again, it's 60 hours of direct academic instruction. That's the minimum. At least 3 hours a week. The research says that 5 weeks is really best practice. However, after listening to our stakeholders and the reality, I was a building principal, you know, by the time teachers pack up and leave, and then facilities come in and take care of the building, there was a lot of wondering about even getting 3 weeks. So this again is a minimum, at least 3 weeks. Attendance, this is a voluntary program. So schools and districts will be required to track attendance. Also, you know, thinking about how we recruit and retain students for our summer programming, that'll be necessary. Professional learning, this came up time and time again, making sure that our staff during the summer, especially in the areas of serving students with disabilities and our English learners, and having culturally responsive practices, that there is training and support for that during the summer.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
Regarding the 60 hours total, so you're just basically 20 hours a week for 3 weeks, is that kind of thinking?
Yeah, you know, we're leaving that open. We're not sure exactly the need. So having that parameter of 3 weeks is the minimum, but then districts can determine based upon their needs, how to structure that.
And I would clarify that beyond that, that 60 hours is of the direct academic instruction time. Districts and schools can go beyond that with other types of enrichment and instructional activities. And so the statute specifically calls out that it must include at least 60 hours of direct academic instruction. And so that's why we have that included in there, but that's a floor, not a ceiling.
Let's see. Sure.
I just jumped in and asked.
Oh.
Are you open to questions right now, or do you want to get through?
Well, just a couple
Okay, go ahead.
pieces. We want to ensure that meals are being served during the summer, and that districts engage in looking at child nutrition programs in the summertime. Also, transportation. We had some questions about if these funds could be used for transportation, and now we've determined that they can, which transportation, as we know in the out-of-school time world, can be a huge barrier. So this is really great news. And with that, do you have any questions for us?
Two questions. One is a suggestion, I don't know where it fits. As I was looking at your definition of direct academic instruction, I'm wondering if there's a way to include in there culturally responsive and sustaining.
Mm-hmm. If you look under the program,
somewhere else.
yeah,
It is.
under the program requirements, we added that language, but that's really good feedback to add that to the broader definition.
And the second one is about ESDs. Are ESDs eligible? I can conceive of where 3 or 4 small school districts who have handfuls of students who might be eligible might want to do some kind of consortia with the ESD, put together a proposal and a program. Is that a possibility?
we would encourage that schools and districts that are eligible to break their funds and partner with ESDs as well. We want to look into that question. I heard the comment earlier. However, I'm wondering if under statute that would be allowable. So we're going to have more discussion. And
Add to that. So I think a couple of things around that. So one, to be really clear, these are not intended to be competitive grants. So these are intended to have the department identify the schools that would be eligible. So they're the highest needs under a couple of categories that the team shared. So the idea that an ESD would just come and say, well, we'll open a regional summer school and invite folks to, it's really at the school level that they get identified. Now, it does say in here that the school district, and we could talk about whether districts, that they can contract with different entities to provide some of those services, and ESDs is among those entities. So the district could make the agreement with the ESD to provide the services the way the rule's written. But we can go back and look at the language in the law and see if there's further ways to create consortia around it.
Does this apply to charter schools as well?
It does, yeah.
I'm going to check on the phone. Is there anybody who might have a question? No? Okay, Chair.
Two items. And again, I understand we can't ask the staff to do work, so I'm going to ask this through you, Anthony. There are many times when there are programs brought to us and there are districts that are eligible. I would very much like to see the listing of districts that are eligible. When that's said, it gives me a better sense of who we're looking at that might be helped. And so my request through you then to Colt, I guess it might be, when in the future, when something would be like this and we may already know the eligibility as a part of the information, that would be really helpful. The second item is, and again, we bring this up so often, and I know you've thought about it already, but I'm thinking of a small school district, Prairie City. It's in between Baker and John Day, 140 students, K through 12, one school district. And even though this is really K through 8 and you're thinking of younger students, what I do know about that community is it's all hands on board for the agricultural production season in the summer, and even the young ones are out there helping. How do we work with those districts around the state where you know the need is great and you'd kind of think they'd really like to take advantage of it, but there's some characteristics in the way? Would we try hard to meet with those districts and find some other way outside of the normal way of doing business to still bring something forward for them? And can you think of what one of those options could be?
Well, I think that the answer to your second question kind of goes to your first point of who exactly is eligible for these programs, because once we've established, like, this is the list of eligible schools for that program, each one is going to have its own unique context and ideas of how do we make sure that this summer program meets the needs of our local community. And so that's going to require our problem solving with them collaboratively to say, you know, we have determined based off the eligibility criteria in the rule that you would have these schools eligible for a summer program. And so now with that in mind, number one, you know, are you accepting these funds and do you want to establish a program? And number two, how can we help you and come alongside you to build a program that meets the program requirements laid out in rural and also serves your districts and your school's needs? Because, you know, a school like that where the kids are all out working in agriculture at that time is going to have different needs than a school in Portland where they're not, but they each are going to have unique barriers that make it challenging to have a quality summer school experience. And so I think it's going to be that we need to work alongside each of the schools that are going to have programs to make sure they have one that makes sense for their local context and still meets the program requirements.
Thank you.
I have 3 ideas around that I want to just share. So one of them is that once this program is up and running and funded by the revenue for it, we will actually have a summer program person leading this. None of these folks are that person, and
Okay.
thankfully they have just taken up the mantle to get this up off the ground for us amongst the other work that they're doing for the agency. So really appreciate their work. But we will have a person who can interact directly with those school districts and help them think about different ways to approach the cultural nuances of their communities and what a summer program might look like. Second, we recognize too that this is an issue, particularly in parts of eastern and southern Oregon, and we have put together a request to the legislature to alter some of the aspects of this particular section of the law. One of those is that in the law, we're not to give program funding to this until July 1st, which is among that time,
Yeah.
and far later than many districts in Eastern Oregon release for the summer. So we've asked them to move that date up to May 15th, so the summer programs could start immediately after the school year ends and before some of that other activity, agricultural activity, really gets up and running. So that's one of the ideas that we've talked about, and that will be in a bill that's being sponsored by the Senate Education Committee.
Okay.
That's the understanding right now, so there's still time for that to change, but that's
Sure.
the current model. And then also to note that the student investment account allows individual school districts to increase instructional time in other ways.
Mhm.
So they could also look at extended school day or starting early or starting later to add time for students,
okay.
or Saturday academies and that kind of thing as well.
Okay.
So there's other options outside the summer program.
And are you saying that they would qualify for the grant, but they could use the idea of adding instructional time by using some of this grant money to do that because they can't do the typical kind of 3 weeks of 20 hours in the summer?
This section in the bill is specific to summer programs, but they can use their student investment account dollars
Yeah.
in the other ways.
Yeah, okay, and I understand that.
Just clarification, is this, if you have a summer school program, can you apply for this? Can it be supplemental, or is this just districts that don't have or don't? Can it be supplemental, or what, just for clarification, because I don't know if I.
So if a school was eligible and they had an existing summer program, we would recommend, let's say they're funding it through Title I, we would encourage them to use these funds to support their summer school and use their Title I funds in another way.
Okay.
And they can also braid their funds as well to create a more robust program.
Any other questions or thoughts?
I'm just thinking about Cole's example and the one you use. So they're not limited to doing a brick and mortar summer school. They could come up with something, and I'm using your school as a hypothetical, where maybe the summer school instruction is 3 hours at the computer at home, as opposed to being a class of 15 kids sitting in a classroom at the school building. Is that right?
We added under the program requirements that it needed to take place in a physical location. And part of that thinking is we do have some virtual schools, and while they'll still be eligible for the grant, if they want to conduct instruction, thinking about all those things that kids need, whether it's food or that direct interaction with an instructor, that it does take place in a physical location. Where that is, so thinking creatively, with our rural districts, I've heard of different ways in which we've served kids where the teacher goes to them, or we need to think broadly, but also think about all of the other pieces, and we thought it was important, as did stakeholders, to add that physical location.
We do, I agree with what Raquel said, and then we also said physical location, frankly, because the outcomes of some of our online programs in the state of Oregon are not outstanding, and the definition that the folks provided around what the direct instructional activities need to look like, along with this part I that says, provide a broad array of focused, well-rounded, and culturally responsive educational activities targeted to meet the needs of students, to advance academic achievement and support student success, including inquiry-based hands-on instruction, healthy and active lifestyle, including physical activity, and students meeting their social and emotional well-being. Those things seemed a little bit challenging to do in an online setting, and so we were really thinking that this should be in some physical location.
But you could, and I don't know how it works out there, but let's say these were middle school age kids. Take the school out to where the kids are.
Yes. Yeah.
And use a physical location out there so that once they left right out of the fields, they go into a classroom kind of setting.
Yes. Yep. And as Eric pointed out too, this is the 60-hour requirement. You could do more on top of that, so you could have a mix of having this in person and then some online work on top of that as well.
Okay, that looks like, okay, thank you so much for the presentation. So, let's see here. This comes to the conclusion of our agenda. I just want to again welcome Jennifer. Thank you for being here. It's great to meet you, and we're excited to have you. So, thank you for participating, everybody, today. Our next meeting will be on December 12th here in Salem, and we are adjourned.